Elon Musk had always been the type of person who believed in pushing boundaries. Whether it was launching rockets into space or thinking about the future of artificial intelligence, he was never content with the status quo. That's what had made him one of the most influential tech moguls of his generation. But today, none of his world-changing ideas seemed to matter. He had arrived at a charity event for children at the Tesla Innovation Center, a place designed to inspire the next generation of thinkers and creators. It wasn't the kind of thing Elon usually attended. He preferred talking to engineers or fellow tech titans about the future of humanity, not mingling with families and kids. But today was different. He had been asked to give a speech on innovation, and he reluctantly agreed, knowing it was for a good cause. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Elon stood backstage, rehearsing his speech in front of a small group of Tesla engineers, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His usual excitement about new technologies, about the future of space travel, wasn't there. Maybe it was the distraction of being around so many families. Maybe it was the weight of his upcoming Mars mission that had him preoccupied. "Elon, you're up next," one of the engineers said, giving him a brief, sympathetic nod. "Right," Elon muttered, adjusting his jacket. He walked out onto the stage, greeted by applause from the crowd of parents, children, and volunteers. The room was filled with the sound of excited chatter, but it faded quickly as he approached the podium. He cleared his throat. "Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. As you all know, I'm Elon Musk, and I work on making life better for humanity, particularly by exploring space and developing sustainable energy. We live in a world of endless possibilities, and the future is in your hands." He went on with his usual speech, talking about the importance of innovation, about how the next generation had the power to create technologies that could solve the world's biggest problems. But as he glanced around the room, something caught his eye. Near the front of the audience, sitting on the floor with a few other children, was a small girl, barely 3 years old. She had short, dark hair and a look in her eyes that seemed far older than her tender age. She wasn't clapping or paying attention to the speech. Instead, she was holding a book, one of those thick, hardbound science books that most adults struggle to comprehend. She was flipping through the pages with an intensity Elon rarely saw in anyone, let alone a toddler. Curious, Elon's eyes locked on her. She didn't look like the other children, who were busy drawing pictures or playing with toys. No, this little girl seemed to be absorbed in something far more serious. He couldn't help himself. His mind, usually filled with engineering equations and futuristic visions, now swirled with curiosity. Who was she? And what was she reading? After his speech, the event organizers led him down to meet some of the children in the room. He shook hands with a few of the older kids, exchanged pleasantries with some of the parents, and smiled politely as he moved along. Then, as if fate had a hand in it, he found himself face to face with the little girl he had noticed earlier. "Hi there," Elon said with a smile. "What's your name?" The little girl didn't smile back, but instead looked at him with deep, serious eyes. "Ava," she said in a clear, almost adult-like voice. Elon knelt down to her level. "Ava, huh? What's that you're reading?" He pointed to the book in her hands, expecting to see something like a picture book or a fairy tale. Instead, the cover read, "Introduction to Quantum Mechanics." Elon blinked. He was no stranger to quantum mechanics, but seeing a 3-year-old holding a book about it made him pause. "Quantum mechanics, huh?" he said with a raised eyebrow. "That's a pretty big topic for someone your age." Ava didn't look up from the book, but responded, "Quantum physics is how we travel to other planets. You need to understand it if you want to go to Mars. But why do rockets only go in a straight line? Wouldn't it be faster if we could teleport?" Elon's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary child. She wasn't asking the usual questions about space or technology that most kids would. This girl was asking questions that even the brightest minds in his field struggled with. How could she understand this? And why was she so matter-of-fact about it? "Well," Elon said, stammering slightly as he tried to collect his thoughts, "teleportation is something we're still working on. It's really complicated, but we're making progress. But rockets, well, they need a lot of fuel, and they need to follow a trajectory to reach space." It's not as simple as just pushing a button and getting there. Ava didn't seem impressed. She looked up from her book and stared at him, unblinking. But if we already have things like cell phones, why can't we just use those to get to Mars? She asked, as if this were the simplest thing in the world. Elon felt a wave of disbelief. This wasn't the kind of question he had expected from a child. She wasn't just asking about how rockets work. She was questioning the very foundation of space travel in a way that no adult ever had. It was a challenge, but in the best possible way. He stood up slowly, looking at her in awe. "You have a very bright mind, Ava," he said, trying to hide his amazement. "Do you know what quantum mechanics is?" Ava looked up at him and nodded. "It's the study of tiny things, like atoms, that can be in two places at once. You can't see them, but they make everything work. Like how electricity works. It's everywhere." Elon was speechless. How could a child this young know about such complex concepts? Sure, she had clearly been taught by her parents, who were scientists. But the way she spoke about these topics with such clarity and confidence made him realize something. This little girl might just be the smartest person in the room, and she wasn't even in kindergarten yet. As he stood there, lost in thought, Ava's parents came over. They introduced themselves politely, and Elon smiled, still processing what had just happened. He shook their hands but couldn't help but glance back at Ava, who had returned to her book as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "Thank you for bringing her today," Elon said to her parents. She's amazing." They chuckled softly. "We know. Ava's always asking questions like that. She's been reading on her own since she was 2. Elon nodded slowly, still absorbing the encounter. "I think she might just have a better understanding of space travel than some of my engineers," he said with a half-laugh. As the event moved on, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Ava. What if there were children out there with minds that could truly change the world? What if the key to the future of space travel wasn't about who had the most experience or resources, but who could think differently, who could ask the right questions? And what if that person was still a toddler? For the first time in a long while, Elon felt a surge of excitement about the future. And it wasn't coming from the next big project or from his companies. It was coming from the most unexpected place, the mind of a 3-year-old child. And this was only the beginning. After the charity event, Elon couldn't stop thinking about the little girl named Ava. He had met thousands of people in his life, from world leaders to Nobel laureates, but none had left such a lasting impression as she had. A 3-year-old with the mind of an adult, or perhaps a mind far beyond that. The questions she had asked, the way she spoke with such confidence and clarity, had left him both awestruck and a little unsettled. He knew he had to learn more about her. The next day, Elon arranged a private meeting with Ava's parents at the Tesla Innovation Center. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something significant about this encounter, something that might change not just his perspective on space, but on the very way we think about intelligence and innovation. When Ava's parents, Sarah and Michael, arrived, they were warm and gracious, but there was an underlying sense of caution in their eyes. They knew what Elon was capable of. He had changed the world, after all, but they also knew that sometimes people didn't understand Ava. Most didn't even know how to talk to her, let alone appreciate the depth of her intellect. "I'm glad we could meet, Elon," Sarah said, offering him a handshake. She was tall, with sharp features that reflected both strength and warmth. Michael, her husband, stood beside her. He was a quiet man, with a kind smile and an air of quiet intelligence. Both of them had PhDs in fields related to quantum mechanics and AI, which, Elon suspected, was probably how Ava had come to understand these complex subjects at such a young age. "It's a pleasure," Elon replied, gesturing toward a set of chairs. "Please, take a seat." After they settled in, Elon couldn't hold back his curiosity. "I have to say, I've never met anyone quite like Ava. She's remarkable. How is she able to understand concepts like quantum mechanics and space travel at such a young age?" Michael exchanged a look with Sarah, and then they both smiled, as though they had anticipated this question. "Ava has always been different," Sarah began, her voice soft but steady. "We never pushed her to learn these things. In fact, we've tried to let her explore whatever interests her. But from the time she could speak, she started asking questions that were unusual. Questions about the universe, about how things work, about why we do what we do. And the more we answered her, the more she wanted to know. We never thought much of it, Michael added, shrugging a little. We're both scientists, so it felt natural to talk to her about things like quantum mechanics. But she didn't just absorb it like other kids. She questioned everything. Not in a typical why way, but in a way that showed she was thinking about the very nature of reality. Elon was fascinated. And how did she start reading these kinds of books? I mean, Introduction to Quantum Mechanics, that's not something most adults would pick up, let alone a 3-year-old. Sarah smiled again, a hint of pride in her eyes. It started when she was around 2. We'd read her picture books, but she was always more interested in what was inside the books. She'd ask about the pictures of atoms, electrons, and stars. At first, we thought it was just a phase. But when she could identify the elements of the periodic table before she could even tie her shoes, we realized there was something special going on. Elon leaned forward, his mind racing. Ava wasn't just intelligent in the conventional sense. She was inquisitive, intuitive, and capable of understanding things that most people would never even attempt to comprehend. It was the kind of raw intelligence that could change the world, but only if someone nurtured it properly. I'm curious, Elon said slowly. What do you think Ava's future holds? Is she interested in science and technology like you both? Does she want to be an engineer, a physicist, or something else entirely? Michael and Sarah exchanged another look, this one more thoughtful. It was clear that they had thought about this often. We're careful not to push her in any particular direction, Sarah said. We want her to explore her interests, not feel like she has to follow in our footsteps. But, yes, she seems drawn to understanding how things work, how the world works, how the universe works. We try to let her lead us, rather than the other way around. Elon nodded, appreciating their approach. It was a rare and admirable quality in parents, especially when it came to a child as exceptional as Ava. It wasn't easy to raise someone who was destined to be a pioneer of sorts, but Sarah and Michael seemed to be handling it with grace and humility. I have to admit, Elon said after a moment, I've always believed that the best ideas come from thinking outside the box, from not just accepting the way things are but challenging them. Ava, she's already doing that. The question she asked me about teleportation and rockets, it's as if she's looking at the problem from a completely different angle. It's not something you see every day. Michael nodded. That's what makes her so different. She doesn't just accept things at face value. She wants to know why. Why does it have to be done a certain way? Why can't it be done better? And she's not afraid to ask the hard questions. Sarah added, we've tried to encourage her to explore every possibility, even if it seems impossible, because that's where real breakthroughs come from. Elon couldn't help but be moved by their philosophy. In a world where people often clung to their preconceived notions and stayed inside the lines, Ava was already learning to break free. And it was clear that her parents understood this well. They weren't just raising a child, they were nurturing a mind capable of changing the future. As the meeting drew to a close, Elon found himself more determined than ever to learn from Ava. She might be young, but her mind was a force to be reckoned with. And in many ways, he realized, the future of technology, space exploration, and even humanity itself might depend on learning to think the way she did. Boldly, without limitations, and with a relentless drive to find answers to questions no one else dared ask. Before they parted ways, Elon turned to Ava, who was sitting quietly next to her parents, her eyes wide with curiosity as she looked around the room. I hope we'll see more of each other, Ava, Elon said with a smile. Ava looked up at him, her gaze steady and serious. I hope you'll figure out how to teleport to Mars soon, she said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Elon laughed, feeling both humbled and inspired. I'll do my best, he replied, already wondering how he could begin to tackle the impossible problem she had just presented. As he watched Ava and her parents walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. He had no idea where it would lead, but one thing was certain. Ava was destined to play a pivotal role in shaping the future. And Elon Musk, the man who dreamed of interplanetary travel, was now driven by the questions of a 3-year-old. Elon spent the following days thinking about Ava. Her questions, her intelligence, and her unshakable curiosity had unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Sure, he had met brilliant minds before, but Ava was different. It was as if her understanding of the world was not just advanced but far-reaching. He couldn't help but wonder if, one day, she would be the key to solving some of the world's most challenging problems. As the weeks passed, Elon began to find himself more and more intrigued by the idea of mentoring Ava, or, at the very least, learning from her. But he knew that this wouldn't be as simple as just teaching a child how to design a rocket or calculate the speed of light. Ava's mind was not limited by conventional thinking. She didn't need the kind of structured education most children received. Instead, she seemed to thrive in an environment where ideas weren't constrained by what was currently possible. It was a Sunday morning when Elon decided to visit Ava again. After spending the last few days working on the SpaceX Mars mission, his mind was running on overdrive, but something about Ava's questions made him want to push the limits of his own thinking. He arranged another meeting with Sarah and Michael, this time asking if Ava would be available for a casual chat. They agreed, and before long, Elon found himself sitting across from the little girl and her parents in the family's cozy living room. This was a rare moment. Elon, typically surrounded by engineers, billionaires, and world leaders, now surrounded by books, toys, and an entirely different kind of genius. Ava was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her face buried in a book, as usual. This time, however, the book was an old, tattered copy of The Principles of Quantum Field Theory. Elon chuckled under his breath. The book was dense even for a graduate student, and here was a 3-year-old flipping through its pages as if it were a comic book. "Hi, Ava," Elon said with a grin, kneeling down beside her. "You seem deep in thought today." Ava didn't look up. "I'm trying to understand how gravity works," she replied in her usual calm, matter-of-fact tone. "It's not just about the Earth pulling things down. It's more complicated than that. I don't think we understand gravity the right way. If we did, we could control it." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Here was a child who not only had the curiosity to question the established understanding of gravity, but the insight to know that there were gaps in the current theories. He had spent his entire career studying gravity, thinking about how it shaped space travel, and even in his most ambitious dreams of reaching Mars, gravity was a constant obstacle. Yet, Ava was already looking beyond what even the brightest scientists had dared to challenge. "That's a really interesting point, Ava," Elon said, leaning in. "You're right that gravity isn't fully understood. There are theories, but they don't explain everything. For example, why is gravity so weak compared to other forces like electromagnetism? It's been a mystery for a long time." Ava looked up at him, her eyes wide with a hint of impatience. "But if gravity's so weak, why does it control everything? It's like we're stuck in it. But if it's weak, it should be easier to escape, right?" Elon couldn't help but laugh. Her mind worked in ways that were so refreshingly different from the average adult. Most people would have accepted the idea that gravity was just something to work around, but Ava was already questioning its very nature. "You're absolutely right," Elon said, his voice full of admiration. "If gravity were weaker, it would be easier to escape its pull. It's actually one of the reasons we need so much fuel to launch rockets into space. But the real challenge is that we haven't yet figured out how to manipulate or control gravity the way we do with electromagnetism. We've had some success with things like magnetic levitation, but true control over gravity, that's something we're still a long way from." Ava nodded as if she were absorbing the information, but she didn't seem satisfied. "Maybe we just need to think differently. Instead of trying to fight gravity, maybe we need to figure out how to make it work with us. If we could understand why gravity pulls things down, we could figure out how to make it push things up instead." Elon paused, his mind racing. Ava wasn't just rethinking gravity. She was trying to redefine the laws of physics itself. Most adults wouldn't even entertain such an idea, yet here she was, a toddler, calmly proposing a solution to one of the most fundamental questions in science. Her suggestion wasn't something he had ever considered before, and it sent a chill down his spine. Could there be a way to work with gravity instead of against it? "Ava, that's actually a really fascinating thought," Elon said, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. "We've been so focused on overcoming gravity through propulsion, but what if there's another way? What if we could actually manipulate the fabric of space-time itself? I've been working on technology for electric cars and rockets, but maybe, just maybe, there's something even bigger we could be missing. Something that could change everything. Ava didn't smile or nod in approval. She simply looked back down at her book, as though the conversation had already moved past her. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Elon looked at Sarah and Michael, who were watching with expressions that were equal parts pride and concern. It was clear that Ava's ability to challenge the boundaries of knowledge was both a gift and a burden. Her mind was constantly racing ahead of everyone else's, and even her parents, brilliant scientists themselves, couldn't keep up with her. Elon, Sarah said gently, I think what you're seeing in Ava isn't just intelligence. It's a different way of seeing the world. A lot of times, people look at problems through the lens of what's already been done, but Ava doesn't see limitations. She sees possibilities, and that's why she's able to ask questions that sound impossible. Michael nodded. It's like she has a direct connection to something much bigger. She doesn't just think in terms of what we know now. She thinks in terms of what could be. Elon leaned back, absorbing their words. It was starting to sink in that Ava wasn't just a child prodigy. She was a mind that could potentially change the course of human history. The way she asked questions, the way she viewed the world, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't just curiosity. It was an entire framework for thinking that no one had dared to explore. You know, Elon said, his voice filled with awe, I've spent my life chasing the impossible. But Ava, I think she's already figured out how to do it. Maybe it's not about technology at all. Maybe it's about how we perceive the universe. As the conversation continued, Elon couldn't help but feel that he was standing on the edge of something monumental. Maybe Ava didn't just have the potential to change the way we think about space and technology. Maybe she was the key to unlocking the future itself. For the first time in a long time, Elon Musk didn't feel like the smartest person in the room. And for the first time in a long time, he felt excited in a way that had nothing to do with rockets or electric cars. The impossible was starting to feel within reach. But the question was, could the world keep up with a mind as extraordinary as Ava's? The following week, Elon found himself going over his notes, trying to piece together something that had never occurred to him before. Ava's words had rattled him in ways he didn't quite understand. She wasn't just asking questions. She was proposing answers. Answers that made him rethink everything from rocket science to the nature of gravity itself. It wasn't the sort of thing one could just dismiss. On the surface, it sounded like childlike fantasy. A 3-year-old suggesting that gravity could be controlled, or even used to push things up instead of pulling them down. But the more he thought about it, the more plausible it became. After all, he had spent years trying to conquer gravity to make space travel more efficient. What if, instead of struggling against it, they could work with it? What if Ava was right? He couldn't shake the feeling that Ava wasn't just a brilliant child. She was a guide. A guide pointing towards something humanity had missed for centuries. On a crisp Thursday morning, Elon was sitting in his office at SpaceX headquarters, staring out the window. His thoughts were a swirl of possibilities, all tied together by one central question. Could the laws of physics be rewritten? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. Ava's been asking about the possibility of a gravity lens for the past few days. I'm not sure what she means, but I think it might be related to what you talked about the other day. Can you meet with us again? Elon's heart raced. The idea of a gravity lens wasn't something he'd considered before. But then again, Ava had a way of connecting dots no one else even knew were there. He quickly typed a response. Of course, let's set something up for this afternoon. I think we're onto something. By 2 p.m., he was sitting with Sarah, Michael, and Ava once again. This time, they were at the family's home in a quiet, wooded area outside of Los Angeles. It was a peaceful, serene place. Nothing like the bustling energy of his corporate world. But it was here, in this quiet space, that Elon felt the most alive. Ava's mind had a way of making even the mundane seem extraordinary. Ava was, as usual, deep in a book. This time, it was an ancient volume on Einstein's theory of general relativity. She didn't need to read it in order. She flipped through the pages with the precision of someone who already knew the content by heart, her tiny finger tracing over equations and diagrams as if they were second nature to her. "Hey, Ava," Elon said, trying to catch her attention. "I heard you were thinking about a gravity lens. What exactly did you mean by that?" Ava didn't look up from the book, but she replied in her usual calm tone. "A lens is something that bends light, but gravity bends space-time, so maybe we could use it like a lens. If we could control how gravity bends, we could control how things move in space. Maybe we could make a lens that focuses gravity instead of light. That could help us push things away from Earth." Elon blinked. "So, you're saying that if we could focus gravity in the same way we focus light, we could use it to propel things? Like a rocket?" Ava nodded slowly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "If you can focus light with a lens, why can't you focus gravity? It would be like bending space-time to create a shortcut, like a wormhole, but without having to make a hole." Elon was speechless. It was an elegant idea, one that he could almost see unfolding in his mind. A gravity lens, a mechanism that could manipulate gravity, focusing its pull or push at specific points in space. It wasn't just about escaping Earth's atmosphere anymore. It was about reshaping the very fabric of space-time itself, using gravity as a tool to propel spacecraft and perhaps even traverse vast distances instantaneously. Sarah and Michael were quiet, watching Elon closely. They could see the wheels turning in his mind, and they knew that the possibilities Ava was suggesting weren't just speculative. They were real. It was like watching someone unlock a new dimension of thought. Elon started, his voice trailing off as he tried to process it. "This could change everything. Ava, do you realize what you're saying? If we could somehow manipulate gravity on that level, we could revolutionize space travel. We could make interstellar travel possible. We could create new technologies, maybe even make teleportation a reality." Ava blinked up at him, as if his excitement was merely a reflection of something she had already known. "I think it's possible," she said simply, "but you'll need a lot of energy to bend space-time like that. You'll need a way to control the energy, too." Elon was already imagining the next steps. What kind of energy would we need to manipulate gravity on that scale? And how would we harness it? Ava paused, her finger gently tracing over the book's diagrams as she thought. "You could start by looking at how black holes bend space-time. Black holes have an immense amount of energy. But you don't need a whole black hole. You need a way to harness that energy in a controlled way, like how you use lasers to focus light. Maybe you could use a superconducting magnet, combined with energy from a fusion reactor. The energy could amplify the gravitational force." Elon's head was spinning. What she was describing was beyond his current understanding, but he could see the foundation of something revolutionary. He thought about the work SpaceX was doing on propulsion systems, and how the company had been investigating ways to harness more power with less fuel. Ava's idea wasn't just innovative, it was otherworldly, and yet it was possible. If they could somehow access the right kind of energy and find a way to control it, this concept of a gravity lens could change everything. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Elon looked up at Sarah and Michael, both of whom were smiling quietly, as if they knew that this was just the beginning. "I'm going to need some help with this," Elon said, his voice firm but filled with excitement. "This isn't something we can just experiment with at SpaceX. We'll need a team of scientists, physicists, energy specialists, and a whole lot of brilliant minds working together. And we'll need resources. I'm going to start reaching out to some of the best in the field. If this works, well, it could change the entire course of humanity." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "We've always believed in letting Ava explore her ideas. And now, it looks like the world might be ready to listen." Elon stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew that this was bigger than anything he had ever worked on before. It wasn't just about rockets, or electric cars, or Mars. This was about bending the very fabric of the universe itself. "I'll start making calls," Elon said, already thinking about how to put this plan into motion. This could be the breakthrough we've all been waiting for. The question is, are we ready for what comes next? The following days were a blur for Elon Musk. The excitement he felt about Ava's gravity lens idea fueled an urgency within him, a sense that he had to act quickly before someone else came across the same concept, or worse, before the idea faded away. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Ava's mind wasn't just a step ahead. It was a quantum leap. His first call was to the best minds in the world, physicists, researchers, and engineers who specialized in space-time, quantum mechanics, and advanced energy systems. But as he set up meetings and conference calls, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous anticipation. Ava was a child, after all. What if her idea was just a product of an imagination untethered by the realities of science? But then he remembered the way Ava had spoken, so matter-of-factly, about black holes and gravity. She wasn't imagining things. She had a way of grasping concepts that most adults struggle to understand. She was a visionary in the truest sense, thinking beyond the conventional. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. His thoughts were consumed with Ava's words. Focus gravity instead of light. It was so simple, yet so profound. If gravity could be bent and shaped like light, if it could be used as a tool for propulsion, everything he had worked on at SpaceX and Tesla could be rewritten. At 3 a.m., he picked up his phone and sent out a single message to his most trusted advisors and colleagues. We are launching a new initiative. We're calling it the Gravity Lens Project. Get ready for the biggest breakthrough in space travel we've ever seen. By morning, the responses flooded in. Enthusiastic, eager, intrigued. But Elon knew that the work ahead would be more difficult than anything he had done before. It wasn't just about building a rocket or designing a new car. It was about reshaping the fabric of the universe. The Gravity Lens Project became the focus of every waking hour. Elon gathered a team of physicists, energy specialists, material scientists, and engineers. Among them were some of the brightest minds in the world, each handpicked by Elon himself. The project's goal was ambitious: to understand how gravity could be manipulated in a controlled, focused way, and to explore whether it was possible to use that control to propel objects in space, without the need for traditional propulsion. The first few meetings were filled with skepticism, as many of the experts were familiar with the prevailing theories about gravity and space-time. Many had worked for years in theoretical physics, and none had ever seriously considered that manipulating gravity itself might be possible. The prevailing view was that gravity was simply too weak to be manipulated on a large scale, especially when compared to other fundamental forces like electromagnetism. But as Elon shared Ava's thoughts, there was a palpable shift in the room. The notion of a gravity lens might have sounded outlandish at first, but the more they examined it, the more feasible it seemed. They began to discuss the possibilities, how they could manipulate space-time, how they might generate the energy required to warp gravity. There was no clear answer, but they were no longer dismissing the idea. "We need to think about how gravity interacts with mass," said Dr. Amelia Bryant, one of the lead researchers, her voice thoughtful. "We know that massive objects like black holes create intense gravitational fields. But could we replicate that effect on a smaller scale? Could we somehow engineer a system that bends space-time in a way that focuses gravity, almost like focusing a beam of light?" Elon was leaning forward in his chair, his mind racing. "We'd need a huge amount of energy. But what if we could tap into quantum entanglement, or even energy from antimatter, to generate the necessary force?" Dr. Bryant nodded, her eyes lighting up. "Exactly. And if we could manipulate that energy, we could potentially create a device capable of bending gravity in a way that allows us to control it." The discussions went on for hours. The team brainstormed every possible approach, considering exotic materials, advanced superconductors, and even theoretical concepts like dark matter and negative energy. But there was still so much they didn't know. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Meanwhile, Elon's thoughts kept returning to Ava. Every time he spoke to his team about the Gravity Lens Project, he felt like he was repeating what she had told him days ago. He had already started to see it. She had laid the groundwork in the simplest terms, like a child drawing the outline of a masterpiece without fully understanding its scope. And Ava, for all her brilliance, was still just 3 years old. How had she come up with these ideas? Elon couldn't help but be amazed by the sheer scope of her intelligence. But there was something else that troubled him. If Ava was this far ahead of everyone, what other ideas had she already conceived? Were they already working on concepts too advanced for anyone to understand? Or worse, had they missed something crucial in their efforts to keep up? 3 weeks into the project, the team had made their first breakthrough. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small, controlled experiment that showed how gravity might be influenced by an artificial electromagnetic field. The result wasn't exactly a gravity lens, but it was a glimpse of something they could build on. "We've got something," Dr. Bryant said, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "It's not perfect yet, but we've demonstrated that gravity can be influenced by electromagnetic fields in ways we didn't think possible." Elon smiled, feeling a surge of hope. "Let's keep pushing forward. We're just getting started." But as the project progressed, Elon's attention kept returning to one nagging question. What if Ava was already on the verge of discovering something even greater? One afternoon, as Elon was working late in his office, he received a message from Sarah. It simply read, "Ava wants to talk to you. She has a new idea she wants to share. Can you make time?" Elon immediately felt a surge of anticipation. It had been weeks since he'd last seen Ava, and he knew that she had been thinking about the gravity lens concept on her own. If she had come up with something new, something that could push their research even further, it could change everything. He immediately called Sarah, arranging to meet her and Ava the following day. The next morning, Elon arrived at Sarah and Michael's home. As usual, Ava was sitting with a book, this time a detailed volume on quantum field theory. She looked up when he entered, her eyes curious but focused, as though she had been waiting for this conversation. "Hi, Elon," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about gravity again. I figured something out." Elon sat down beside her, eager to hear what she had to say. "I'm all ears, Ava." She didn't smile, but she nodded as if she were about to share something truly important. "You know how we've been talking about focusing gravity like a lens? I think I figured out how to do it. But it's not just gravity that can be controlled. It's space itself." Elon's breath caught in his throat. "Space itself?" Ava nodded, looking up at him with a certainty that felt almost eerie. "Yes. If we can control space, we can control everything in it. We can move things, change their positions without using fuel. We can make spaceships travel without rockets." The room went silent as the implications of her words sank in. Ava wasn't just talking about manipulating gravity anymore. She was talking about bending space itself. And if that were possible, if they could control space, then everything Elon had been working on would be rendered obsolete. They wouldn't just need rockets or gravity lenses. They could teleport. Elon stared at Ava for a long moment, his mind racing to process what she had just said. He had heard of concepts like space-time manipulation and even quantum teleportation before, but hearing a 3-year-old say it so casually felt surreal. Her innocence and simplicity only added to the weight of the idea she had just dropped into the conversation. "You're saying that we could control space itself?" Elon asked, his voice almost a whisper. "As in, we could move objects without using any traditional propulsion?" Ava nodded with the same calm assurance she always had. "Yes. If we can control the way space bends and stretches, then we can move things. We don't need rockets or fuel. We just need to make space behave differently." Elon's pulse quickened as the implications of what she was saying began to hit him. If they could control space, then they could manipulate the very foundation of movement. No more need for massive engines burning fuel, no more complex gravitational assists, just the ability to change how space itself was organized. It sounded like science fiction, but then again, here was a 3-year-old who had just described it in a way that seemed almost too simple. "Okay," Elon said, leaning forward, his mind spinning with possibilities. "How do we begin to do that? How do we control space?" Ava's eyes shifted toward the window, her gaze distant as though she were considering something beyond the confines of the room. She paused for a moment, then spoke softly. "You have to start with energy. A lot of energy. And then you need to create a field that can bend space. Kind of like how you bend light with a mirror, but with space instead." Elon felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "A field? What kind of field? Electromagnetic? Gravitational?" Ava shook her head, her expression serious. "Not those. You need something more. Something that's not just a force we already know. You need something that can interact with space on a deeper level. Something that goes beyond what we can see or measure." Her words were vague, but Elon could see the puzzle pieces beginning to form in his mind. He had worked on advanced energy concepts for years, developing fusion propulsion and trying to make sense of the enormous forces at play in space. But what Ava was talking about, this wasn't just about harnessing energy in the traditional sense. This was about something deeper, something more fundamental. I've been working on quantum fields, Elon said, almost absent-mindedly. There's a theory that suggests space-time isn't just empty. It's filled with energy, a sort of quantum foam. But controlling that? That's on a whole different level. Ava looked at him with quiet wisdom. You have to think about space like a fabric. When you pull on one part of it, the rest changes too. If you can control how the fabric stretches or contracts, you can move things without touching them. Elon could feel his heart racing. This wasn't just a breakthrough in propulsion. It was a fundamental shift in how humanity understood the universe. To control space itself meant the possibility of instantaneous travel, of reducing the enormous distances between stars, even planets. It meant no more reliance on the limited energy sources they currently had. It was everything he had hoped for in his wildest dreams, and yet it felt as though he were standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the unknown. I need to talk to the team, he said, standing up abruptly. We need to explore this. We need to see if there's any way this could be possible. I'm going to reach out to the top quantum physicists in the world. By the end of the week, Elon had assembled a team of quantum physicists, cosmologists, and energy specialists. They gathered in one of SpaceX's most secure research facilities, a place hidden away from the prying eyes of the media and the world at large. The goal: to explore Ava's concept of controlling space and energy. Elon knew that they would need to think outside the box. This wasn't just about propulsion systems or new ways to fuel rockets. They were attempting to manipulate the very laws of nature that had governed the universe for eons. The first few meetings were cautious. Many of the scientists were skeptical. They had heard of theories on space-time manipulation and wormholes, but these were just that, theories. Concepts that, even with modern technology, seemed years away from becoming reality. However, when Elon shared Ava's idea and described her thoughts on manipulating space, something in the room shifted. It wasn't just another science fiction fantasy. The more they discussed it, the more they realized that, while it was highly speculative, Ava's concept wasn't entirely beyond the realm of possibility. Dr. Isaac Wu, one of the lead quantum physicists, brought up the concept of the Casimir effect, a phenomenon where two uncharged plates in a vacuum attract each other due to quantum fluctuations in the fabric of space. What if, Dr. Wu said slowly, we could use the Casimir effect as a basis for manipulating space? These quantum fluctuations might not just be a nuisance, they might be the key to bending space itself. The team was quiet for a moment, letting the idea sink in. Elon's mind raced. The Casimir effect involved energy that existed at the quantum level, and manipulating that energy could, theoretically, be a way to affect space-time. If we could amplify that effect, Elon said, maybe we could create a stable field that interacts with space, not just energy. If space itself can bend, maybe we can manipulate that bend to move objects. The room buzzed with energy as the idea began to take shape. But there was still a fundamental challenge: how to generate enough power to manipulate space on a scale large enough for real-world applications. We're talking about manipulating space on a cosmic level, said Dr. Naomi Ruiz, a leading energy specialist. We need something to power this that's beyond anything we've ever conceived. We're going to need an entirely new energy source, something more powerful than anything currently available. Elon nodded. We'll need to focus on developing fusion energy, something stable, something with enough density to affect space at the quantum level. If we can get that right, everything else will follow. For the next few months, the team worked tirelessly. They experimented with new energy sources, refined their understanding of quantum mechanics, and explored cutting-edge theories of space-time manipulation. But despite their progress, something still gnawed at Elon. Ava's idea had inspired them, but she had barely scratched the surface. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Ava's understanding of the universe was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was as though she had intuitively tapped into something that was years, if not decades, ahead of their current knowledge. And then, one day, after weeks of research and experiments, the breakthrough happened. Elon sat in a small, windowless room deep within SpaceX's R&D facility. The atmosphere was tense as the team prepared for the next phase of the experiment. They were about to test the first small-scale prototype of the gravity lens, a device designed to manipulate space-time in a controlled environment. "Elon, are you sure we're ready for this?" Dr. Ruiz asked, her voice shaky with excitement. "We don't know what could happen if we succeed or fail." Elon gave a tight smile, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "If we succeed," he said, "we change the world." With a deep breath, he nodded, signaling the start of the experiment. As the team activated the prototype, the room filled with a soft hum of energy. Then, without warning, the space in front of them began to warp. The air seemed to shimmer, and the energy field they had created rippled like a distorted mirror. The team watched in stunned silence as the small object on the test table, an innocuous piece of metal, began to levitate, seemingly propelled by nothing. The gravity around it was no longer acting in the way it should. They had done it. The first test of space-time manipulation was a success. The success of the first test didn't just make history, it shattered it. For a brief moment, the team stood frozen, staring at the small object hovering in midair, defying the very laws of physics they had studied for decades. The prototype had worked, but the euphoria that followed was short-lived, replaced by the deep, gnawing realization that they had just opened a door to a world of possibilities they couldn't yet comprehend. Elon was the first to speak, his voice calm but filled with awe. "We've done it. We've bent space." The room erupted into chaotic applause and cheers, but Elon's mind was elsewhere. He walked toward the test table, carefully observing the object suspended in the energy field. The machine hummed quietly, a soft, continuous vibration that seemed to resonate with something deeper than technology, something ancient, almost primal. "Get me the data from the field," he said, his voice now firm, but his thoughts still spinning. "We need to know exactly what we're dealing with here. How stable is the field? How much energy are we pulling? What kind of changes are happening on a quantum level?" Dr. Isaac Wu was the first to respond. He was at the console, furiously typing commands to download the data. His eyes were wide with excitement, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. "It's stable for now. We're seeing a fluctuation in energy levels, but it's within the expected range. However, this is only the first test. The real challenge will be to maintain this kind of stability over time." Elon nodded, his thoughts already racing ahead. The implications were vast. If they could stabilize this phenomenon, they wouldn't just revolutionize space travel. They would alter humanity's relationship with the universe itself. The potential applications were infinite, from instantaneous transportation to harnessing gravitational energy in ways never before thought possible. But there was one thing Elon couldn't shake: the unsettling thought that they were only scratching the surface of something much greater. Ava had hinted at it before, but now it was clear. This discovery, this manipulation of space, wasn't just about engineering. It was a new understanding of the universe, one that they hadn't even begun to grasp. For the next few weeks, the Gravity Lens project consumed every waking moment of Elon's life. The team worked around the clock, refining the prototype, expanding their research, and pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. The first test was just the beginning, but it had opened up a floodgate of new challenges. One major hurdle was power. The amount of energy required to manipulate space on a large scale was enormous, far beyond what their current systems could provide. They had successfully harnessed energy at the quantum level, but amplifying it without causing catastrophic instability was proving to be a monumental task. Elon called in every expert he knew to help solve the problem, including the brightest minds in fusion energy, antimatter research, and even dark energy. But there were no easy answers. Every new idea brought with it an entirely new set of risks, and Elon was well aware that pushing too hard could result in something that no one, not even the brightest minds in the world, could control. Despite the setbacks, there was a sense of hope that hung in the air. The impossible was no longer beyond reach. Space-time could be bent. Objects could be moved without propulsion. And all of it started with a simple idea, a spark from a 3-year-old child. One afternoon, as Elon sat alone in his office, Staring out at the stars through the expansive windows, he received a message from Sarah. It was simple, but it was enough to stir his heart. Ava wants to meet with you. She has something new to share. Elon's curiosity piqued. He immediately arranged to meet with Ava and Sarah. He had grown accustomed to the fact that Ava's ideas were often far ahead of what even the most brilliant scientists could understand. But this time, he felt a sense of urgency, as though Ava had reached a new level of understanding. What could she possibly have in mind now? The following day, Elon arrived at Sarah and Michael's home, where he found Ava sitting on the couch with a stack of books next to her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes sharp and focused. But there was something different about her today, a sense of maturity in her gaze that made it hard to believe she was only 3 years old. "Hi, Elon," Ava said, her voice calm. "I figured something out." Elon smiled, taking a seat beside her. "I'm listening. What have you figured out this time?" Ava didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for one of the books beside her, an ancient-looking volume on string theory, and opened it to a page filled with diagrams and equations. She pointed to one of the diagrams, a representation of multidimensional space. "This is the first thing you need to understand," she said, her finger tracing the lines on the page. "Space isn't just 3 dimensions. It's more. It's a fabric, yes, but it's woven together with multiple layers. The energy field we're creating isn't just interacting with the visible dimensions. It's affecting the other dimensions, too." Elon's eyes widened. He had studied string theory in the past, but the idea that space-time could be influenced not just by gravity, but by higher dimensional energy fields was an entirely new concept to him. "You're saying that the energy field we're creating can reach into higher dimensions?" Elon asked, trying to make sense of what Ava was saying. Ava nodded. "Yes, and when it does, it creates ripples, like waves in the fabric of space. If we can control those ripples, we can manipulate space on a much larger scale." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. "You're talking about tapping into dimensions beyond our perception, beyond the 4 dimensions we know." Ava's gaze met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a glimmer of understanding that transcended her age. "Exactly. But we have to be careful. If we go too far, we could tear the fabric. The more energy we use, the more unstable it becomes." Elon was silent for a long moment, absorbing what Ava had just said. It wasn't just about manipulating gravity or bending space. It was about interacting with dimensions that had never been accessible to human science before. It was as if Ava had unlocked a door to the next frontier of human exploration. The conversation left Elon feeling both exhilarated and deeply uneasy. If they could learn to manipulate higher dimensions, the possibilities were limitless. But so were the dangers. For the next several days, Elon became consumed with Ava's new revelation. He spent hours poring over the latest research in higher dimensional physics, consulting with experts in string theory and quantum mechanics. And while there was still so much they didn't know, one thing was clear. Ava's understanding was ahead of everyone. She had already glimpsed a reality that humanity hadn't even begun to comprehend. Elon knew that they had to proceed with caution. The more they learned, the more dangerous this new frontier became. But the promise of what lay beyond, of understanding the fundamental nature of the universe, was too great to ignore. They couldn't stop now. The Gravity Lens project had evolved into something far more complex than anyone had imagined, and it was no longer just a quest for propulsion. They were on the verge of discovering the very fabric of reality itself. And this discovery, if they could unlock it, would change everything. The weeks that followed Ava's revelation were a blur of activity, intensity, and increasingly strange discoveries. Elon and his team worked tirelessly, diving into higher dimensional physics in a way that had previously been nothing more than theoretical discussion among the world's leading minds. Now, with Ava's cryptic insight guiding their way, they were taking tentative steps into uncharted territory. Elon felt as if they were standing at the precipice of something monumental, but he couldn't shake the gnawing sense that they were pushing too far, too fast. Every experiment, every new breakthrough, seemed to lead to a more pressing question. Where would it all lead? And could they really control the immense power they were unleashing? One afternoon, While Elon was deep in a strategy meeting with the team at SpaceX's headquarters, his phone buzzed. The message was from Sarah, and it was brief but to the point. Ava has a vision. You need to come now. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Ava had always been more than just brilliant. There was something otherworldly about her insights, something that went beyond pure intellect. He didn't hesitate. At Sarah's house, the air felt different, thick with anticipation. Ava was waiting in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, as if she had been meditating. Sarah was there too, pacing in the background, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. Elon, Sarah said, her voice tight. Ava's been quiet for a while, but she's been talking about something big, and I'm worried it might be too much for her. Ava, sensing their presence, looked up. Her eyes were different now, darker, more intense, as though she were seeing something the rest of them couldn't. Hi, Elon, she said softly. I saw the future. Well, part of it, anyway. Elon knelt down in front of her, his heart pounding. What did you see, Ava? Ava's gaze remained steady, her voice steady and grave. I saw a world where we can bend space. We can move objects without propulsion. We can manipulate time. We can even travel between stars. But there's a cost. The fabric of space is fragile. Every time we make a change, it gets weaker. We're pulling at the very foundation of everything. Elon swallowed, his throat tight. And what happens if the fabric tears? Ava's eyes darkened. I don't know, but I think we're getting close. If we push too hard, too fast, everything might collapse. Not just here, but everywhere. We might destroy everything we're trying to save. A chill ran down Elon's spine. For the first time, the enormity of what they were attempting hit him fully. The discoveries they were making could reshape civilization, perhaps even the entire universe. But as Ava said, they were teetering on the edge of something they didn't fully understand. He stood up, shaking off the unease creeping up his spine. We need to take this slow. No more pushing for breakthroughs. We need to stabilize what we have and figure out how to control it. We need to stop before we make it worse. But Ava shook her head. It's already too late, Elon. The ripples have started. The changes are happening. The following days were filled with a sense of urgency that everyone on the team could feel. There was no question that they had unlocked something powerful, beyond powerful. But with that power came an unexpected danger. Ava's vision was weighing heavily on them, especially Elon. His usual confidence had been replaced by a cautiousness that made everyone uneasy. To address the concerns, Elon organized a meeting with the top physicists and engineers. This time, they weren't just talking about energy fields or propulsion, they were discussing the very nature of the space-time continuum. Dr. Isaac Wu, the quantum physicist, was the first to speak. We've been able to manipulate space locally, but as Ava said, we have no real understanding of the larger implications. If we keep moving forward without fully understanding the consequences, we might destabilize not just our environment, but the entire structure of reality. Elon leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Isaac. So what do we do now? Do we stop the project entirely? I'm not saying we stop, Isaac replied cautiously. I'm saying we proceed with extreme caution. We need to stabilize our results, establish boundaries, and create fail-safes. If this becomes too volatile, we need a way to shut it down quickly. A hush fell over the room. Dr. Naomi Ruiz, the energy specialist, added, what we're attempting isn't just a new form of propulsion. It's a new kind of energy interaction. We're playing with the very fabric of the universe. The question is, how much is too much? Exactly, Elon said, rubbing his temples. We're doing something no one has ever done before. There's no manual for this kind of work. The meeting ended with a plan to slow down the experiments, but it was clear that no one in the room felt entirely comfortable with the course they were on. That night, after the meeting, Elon couldn't sleep. He stared out into the dark sky, lost in thought. The stars seemed so distant, so unreachable. Yet, in the next few years, they could be closer than they ever seemed possible. The question, though, was whether they would still be here to explore them. Elon knew that Ava was right. They were on the verge of something world-changing, but they were also skating on thin ice. The deeper they dug, the closer they came to the edge. And once they crossed it, There might be no turning back. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sarah. Ava's been quiet again. I think she might be having visions. She's insisting we need to act now. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He stood up and grabbed his jacket, the weight of the decision pressing on him like never before. When Elon arrived at Sarah's house, he found Ava sitting quietly, staring out the window with a look of deep concentration. She turned to him as he entered. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I had another vision, but this one's different." Elon stepped closer, sensing the urgency in her tone. "What did you see this time?" Ava took a deep breath, her small voice trembling slightly. "I saw destruction, not just here, but everywhere. The fabric of space was torn apart. The changes we made, they spread too far. They grew too powerful. We were trying to change the world, but we ended up breaking it." Elon froze. The enormity of her words struck him like a blow to the chest. If Ava's vision was right, they were on the brink of something catastrophic. The power they sought to control wasn't just a tool for progress. It was a force that could unravel everything they held dear. "We need to act quickly," Ava whispered, "before it's too late." Elon couldn't shake the weight of Ava's warning. Her vision, dark and foreboding, echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat. They had already stretched the boundaries of science beyond comprehension, but now they stood on the precipice of an unknown abyss, one that could very well swallow everything they had worked for. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting at the SpaceX headquarters. The usual buzz of progress and innovation had been replaced by a tense silence. There was no denying that the Gravity Lens project had surpassed even their wildest expectations, but the stakes had escalated. As the team gathered in the conference room, Elon could see the unease in their eyes. Everyone had felt the tremors of the breakthroughs, but now, those tremors felt more like aftershocks of an impending earthquake. Elon stepped to the front, his voice firm, but with a layer of worry that was uncharacteristic for him. "We've reached a critical juncture in the project. After Ava's vision last night, we need to reevaluate where we are and where we're headed. The cost of continuing without proper controls might be far greater than any of us anticipated." Dr. Isaac Wu spoke up first, his voice cautious but resolute. "Elon, you know as well as I do that we can't just stop now. We've unlocked something that could change everything. It's not just about transportation or power. It's about rewriting the very laws of physics." "But we don't understand what we're dealing with," Elon countered, a trace of frustration in his tone. Ava's warning was clear. If we push any further, we might end up breaking the universe itself. Do you understand that? Space-time is a delicate fabric. If we tear it, there's no telling what could happen. I understand the risks, Elon, Isaac replied. But think about what we could achieve if we get this right. We're not talking about decades of progress. We're talking about humanity's next great leap. This could put us on the map for interstellar travel. This could solve energy crises, end hunger, and clean the environment. The potential? I'm not asking about the potential, Elon interrupted, his voice sharp. I'm asking about the consequences. And if Ava's vision is right, we could destroy everything. Not just the project. Not just us. We could unravel the very laws that hold the universe together. The room fell silent. No one had an immediate answer. There was no protocol for this kind of discovery, no precedent for manipulating the very fabric of existence. Finally, Dr. Naomi Ruiz spoke up. Elon, we have to weigh the costs. Yes, the risks are enormous. But if we abandon this now, if we don't move forward with the proper checks, someone else will. And we'll be left behind. Humanity won't be able to compete on the world stage. We have to at least try to stabilize this phenomenon. The alternative is to stand still. And if the experiment fails? Elon asked, his eyes narrowing. What happens if we lose control? Naomi's voice softened. I think we need to explore a different path, a more cautious one. Maybe we don't push for the grand leap just yet. Instead, let's focus on stabilizing the core principles. If we can figure out how to control the energy without causing instability, we might have something truly groundbreaking. But it requires more than just testing it in a lab. It requires scaling it up gradually. Elon nodded, considering her words. All right, that's what we'll do. We're not halting the project, but we're slowing down the pace. We'll focus on stabilization and developing a fail-safe protocol. If anything goes wrong, we shut it down immediately, no questions asked. For the next several weeks, the project shifted from groundbreaking experimentation to methodical stabilization. The team reworked every model, reevaluating every variable, every energy pulse, and every quantum fluctuation. Elon personally oversaw every test, and though there were still moments of exhilaration, the excitement had been replaced with a cautious optimism. But despite their best efforts to control the phenomenon, strange anomalies began to occur. The energy field they had harnessed seemed to ripple in ways that didn't align with any of their calculations. Occasionally, the test would result in unexpected temporal shifts. Objects would appear to vanish for a few seconds before reappearing, or time itself would seem to slow down and speed up erratically in certain areas. Elon knew they were getting closer to something, but what exactly that something was remained unclear. It was as if they had stepped into an entirely new dimension, one where the rules of reality were still being written. And as they continued their experiments, it became more evident that Ava's warning wasn't just an abstract fear, it was a premonition. One evening, after a particularly intense round of tests, Elon found himself alone in the lab. The monitors flickered softly, casting an eerie glow across the empty space. He was lost in thought, staring at the patterns of energy on the screen, when suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Ava was right, wasn't she? Elon turned, startled, to find Dr. Isaac Wu standing behind him. The look on Isaac's face was one of quiet intensity. "What do you mean?" Elon asked, his voice low. Isaac hesitated for a moment before speaking. "She was right about the risks. We're seeing things happen that we can't explain. These temporal shifts, they're not just anomalies. I think we're beginning to breach the fabric of space-time in a way we can't control. And if we don't stop soon, we might be too far in to turn back." Elon's stomach tightened. Isaac's words echoed Ava's vision. They had already crossed a line. They were no longer just pushing the boundaries of science. They were potentially dismantling the very structure of reality itself. "I know," Elon said softly, his mind racing. "I've been thinking the same thing. The fabric is fragile. If we keep going, it could tear apart completely." Isaac's eyes widened. "What are you going to do?" Elon didn't answer right away. His thoughts were a storm of possibilities and consequences. He had always prided himself on his ability to move forward, to push past limits, to chase the next big breakthrough. But now, standing on the edge of this precipice, he felt the weight of it all. "I don't know yet," he said, his voice distant. "But I do know one thing. We have to figure this out. We can't just walk away." Isaac nodded grimly. "Then we need to find a way to stabilize this, before it's too late." Back at Sarah's house, Ava sat quietly, watching the sky through the window. Her small face was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of a wisdom far beyond her years. She had seen it. She had felt the ripples of what was coming. And while the rest of the world was still caught up in the excitement of the breakthroughs, Ava knew the truth. They were all playing with fire. And the fire was growing. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Ava whispered softly to herself, "The ripples are spreading. And soon, there will be no way back." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon spent the following days and a days, torn between his instinct to push forward and his growing sense of foreboding. Every test, every modification, every new attempt to stabilize the gravity lens project only deepened his unease. The temporal anomalies continued, and they were becoming more pronounced with each passing day. It wasn't just the occasional flash of erratic time distortion anymore. Objects were starting to phase in and out of existence, causing momentary disorientation and panic among the team. The room buzzed with urgent discussions about possible explanations. Dr. Isaac Wu had been spending sleepless nights trying to track the behavior of the energy field. "I don't think we're dealing with a simple energy disturbance anymore," he admitted to Elon one evening, his face pale from exhaustion. "It's almost as if the project is tearing into the very fabric of space-time itself." Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. If that's true, then we're at the edge of something much bigger than we anticipated. This could be the key to interstellar travel, or the beginning of something catastrophic. We need to think carefully. If we let this go unchecked, it's not just the project that's at risk. The entire world could be. Isaac looked at him, his gaze filled with doubt. We don't even know what's happening, Elon. We're experimenting with forces that should never be tampered with. It's beyond our understanding. We've already triggered shifts in time and space that we can't reverse. If we keep pushing, we might end up unraveling the very laws that govern reality. It could be the end of everything. Back at Sarah's house, things had grown eerily quiet. Ava had spent most of her time alone in her room, reading books or drawing on pieces of paper that she refused to show anyone. But Sarah knew her daughter well enough to understand that Ava was sensing something no one else was. Ava had always been attuned to things beyond the ordinary, her mind dancing at the edges of knowledge that even the greatest scientists couldn't touch. But lately, she seemed more withdrawn, more contemplative, as if the weight of what she understood was becoming too much for her. "Mom," Ava said quietly one evening, walking into the kitchen where Sarah was preparing dinner. "The ripples are growing." Sarah froze, turning to face her daughter. "What do you mean, sweetie? What ripples?" Ava's small face was grave, her eyes unusually dark. "The ones in the fabric of space. It's like a thread being pulled and stretched. But the more it stretches, the more it weakens. It's starting to break." Sarah's heart clenched in her chest. "Ava, do you mean, is the project causing this?" Ava didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked over to the window and stared out at the sky, her expression distant. "I don't know if it's the project, but I can feel it. The cracks are spreading. They're getting bigger." Sarah's voice trembled as she approached her daughter. "We need to stop it. We need to make them stop." Ava shook her head, her eyes distant. "It's already too late, Mom. The changes have started. We can't stop it now, but we can try to help. Maybe we can put the threads back together. But we have to be careful." Sarah's stomach dropped. The gravity of what Ava was saying hit her hard. "Ava, you don't mean that we should?" "No," Ava interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't mean we should stop. But we need to fix what's broken before it tears everything apart." Back at the SpaceX headquarters, the pressure was mounting. Elon had ordered a full suspension of all experiments, but the damage had already been done. The team was frantically working to contain the anomalies, but each new test seemed to amplify the disturbances. The project had unlocked something fundamental in the fabric of reality, and now there was no turning back. Elon sat alone in his office, staring out at the city below. The distant hum of the world felt alien to him now, as if he were separated from it by an invisible wall. He felt detached, almost as if the world around him wasn't real. The power they had unleashed, the power Ava had foreseen, was beginning to have unpredictable effects. The temporal anomalies were no longer confined to the lab. They were spreading. He tapped his fingers against his desk, thinking. Ava had been right. The ripples were already spreading. If they kept pushing forward with their experiments, they could unravel not just their reality, but every reality. There were no guarantees that they could fix this once the damage had been done. He needed answers. He needed to speak to Ava again. When Elon arrived at Sarah's house that evening, the air felt thick with tension. Ava was sitting at the same window, her eyes locked on the horizon, as if waiting for something to happen. "Ava," Elon said softly, kneeling beside her, "I need you to tell me exactly what we're dealing with. Can we stop this? Can we reverse the damage we've caused?" Ava didn't turn to face him. She just kept staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. It's not like we can just turn it off. The fabric is already torn. What we've done isn't going away." Elon swallowed hard. "Then what can we do? How do we fix it?" Ava finally turned to face him, her small voice filled with a gravity beyond her years. "We need to reinforce the fabric. We need to balance the forces we've unleashed. But it's not something that can be done with machines or technology. It's about understanding the flow of the threads, the way everything is connected." "Elon, you can't control this with your mind," Sarah interjected, a worried edge to her voice. "She's just a child." What does she mean by the threads? You don't understand what she's saying, do you? I'm starting to, Elon replied, his voice distant. Ava's been right from the beginning. She's seeing something we can't comprehend, but she's also telling us how to fix it. I think she understands the deeper mechanics of what we've done. Ava looked back at the sky. The threads are the connections between all things, the way space-time is woven together. Every change we make creates a ripple. If we don't fix it now, it will grow. And when it grows too big, it will collapse. Everything will collapse. Elon felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. But we don't have the ability to understand what you're talking about, Ava. We don't have the tools. How can we possibly repair something so fundamental? You don't need tools, Ava said, her voice quiet but confident. You just need to understand that everything is connected. The fabric is part of us all. And if we don't learn to work together, to repair the connections, we'll all fall apart. Elon stood, his mind racing. The answers had always been there, but they had been hidden in plain sight. It wasn't about technology. It was about understanding something far more profound. They had unlocked a power that was so deeply woven into the fabric of existence that their very intervention had altered it. But now, they needed to heal it. Elon spent the night awake, his thoughts consumed by Ava's cryptic words. She had always been brilliant, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The vision she spoke of, the idea that space-time itself was a fabric, something that could be torn or mended, it was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Ava's mind worked in a way that no scientist, no expert in the field, could quite comprehend, and that left Elon in a strange position. He was a visionary, a man who had bent technology to his will to explore the limits of space, but now he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't sure he could control. He sat alone in his office at SpaceX, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The project had already gotten out of hand, but was it too late to fix? He had to believe it wasn't, but the questions loomed large. Could they really repair the fabric of space-time? And if they couldn't, what would be left of the world they'd known? The following morning, Elon arranged another meeting with his team. It wasn't a discussion about the latest discoveries or technological developments anymore. This time, it was a conversation about the future. It was a meeting about survival. As the team gathered, Elon stood in front of a large screen, displaying the current data from the Gravity Lens project. The readings were chaotic, energy waves fluctuating unpredictably, particles shifting in and out of phase, and temporal anomalies intensifying. "We're running out of time," Elon began, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "As some of you already know, the anomalies are growing. The changes are happening in real time, and we have no idea where they will stop." Ava's vision wasn't a warning. It was a reality we're facing now. "We've already breached the threshold." Isaac Wu was the first to speak. "We've been talking about this for weeks, Elon. We can't stop now. But if we keep pushing forward without understanding what's happening, we could end up causing something irreversible." "I agree," Elon said, locking eyes with Isaac. "But Ava has given us something we can work with. She's told us how we can fix this. It's not about brute force or more calculations. It's about understanding the connections between everything, the threads, as she calls them." Dr. Naomi Ruiz, who had been quietly reviewing the data, now raised her head. "I'm not sure I understand, Elon. What do you mean by the threads?" "Ava believes that the anomalies aren't just glitches or mistakes," Elon explained. "She's describing space-time as a kind of woven fabric, one that holds everything together. When we manipulate it, when we disrupt it too much, we cause rips, and those rips spread like threads pulling apart. We can't simply control it with more technology. We need to understand how it fits together, how it works." "Are you suggesting we use some sort of natural understanding to fix the fabric?" Naomi asked, skeptical. Elon nodded. "Exactly. We need to stop thinking of this as just a physics problem. It's a systemic one. What Ava has pointed out is that if we approach this as we would any other problem, by trying to control and manipulate, we're only exacerbating the issue. We need to stabilize it, but through balance, not force." Dr. Wu was staring at the screen now, lost in thought. "So you're saying that if we stop treating this as a purely mechanical problem, we might be able to restore balance? But how do we even begin?" A silence fell over the room. The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. We start small, Elon said. We stabilize the existing anomalies. We focus on slowing down the fluctuations, reducing the intensity of the ripples in the fabric. Ava suggested we may be able to reinforce the bonds, not by creating more energy, but by creating harmony. We need to understand that connection. But to do that, we'll need to build an entirely new approach to the project. Naomi crossed her arms. And what does that mean practically? How do we reinforce the bonds of space-time? Elon leaned in, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. We need to recalibrate the system, not with more data or tests, but by using the principles Ava suggested. We create harmonic resonance. Instead of pushing further into the unknown, we adjust what we have, fine-tune it, until we can stabilize the fluctuations. It's about bringing the energy into alignment. Isaac stared at Elon, his expression uncertain but intrigued. It sounds almost philosophical, but I can't deny that the current approach is spiraling out of control. If there's a chance this will work, I'm in. Elon nodded. Good. We'll need all hands on deck for this. We'll begin by recalibrating the fields and setting up harmonic frequencies to stabilize the energy flows. This will take time. It's a delicate operation. That evening, Elon went to Sarah's house, knowing he needed to speak with Ava again. The weight of the decision ahead of him was overwhelming. If this didn't work, they would be risking far more than the project itself. They would be risking everything. Ava was in her usual spot by the window, her small frame framed against the fading twilight. She didn't turn as he entered, but her voice rang out softly. "You're trying to fix it, aren't you?" she asked, as if she had known he'd come. Elon sat down next to her. "Yes, we're going to try. We're going to slow things down, create balance. But we need to do it carefully, Ava. If we push too hard, too fast." Ava turned toward him, her eyes filled with a strange wisdom. "You'll tear it apart," she said softly. "But if you don't move at all, it will just get worse. You can't stay still, Elon. You have to find a way to move forward without breaking it." He swallowed hard. "I'm trying, Ava, but I don't know if we can control it anymore." Ava's face softened. "You have to believe in the connection. The threads are fragile, yes, but they're strong too. If you understand that, you can fix it." Elon looked into her eyes, seeing the quiet confidence there. A confidence that he didn't fully understand but could no longer dismiss. "I'll do my best," he said, "but I need you to help us. We can't do this without understanding what you see." Ava nodded. "I will, but you have to trust me. You can't force it, just like you can't force the stars to align. You have to wait for the right moment." The next morning, Elon gathered the team at SpaceX. This time, there was no talk of new technology or equipment. There was no grand vision of colonizing Mars or exploring the far reaches of the solar system. This was about survival. "We're going to proceed differently," Elon began, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We're going to stabilize, not by brute force, but by focusing on balance. We'll implement harmonic resonance to stabilize the energy flows and prevent further distortion. The first step is to slow down the fluctuations. We have to find the harmony between the energy fields and the fabric of space itself." Isaac gave him a cautious nod. "It's a risk, but it's the only real chance we have." Elon took a deep breath. "Let's move forward, carefully." As they worked, the team marveled at the changes they were able to make. The fluctuations began to subside, slowly but surely. The energy fields responded to the subtle adjustments, and the anomalies began to diminish. It was working, at least for now. But as the days passed, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. They were on the right path, but they were still just one wrong move away from unraveling everything. The fabric of space-time was fragile, and so were the bonds they were trying to repair. The days blurred together as Elon and his team worked tirelessly, refining the adjustments they had made to the gravity lens project. Every step forward seemed fragile, as if they were walking a razor-thin line between success and disaster. Each small success felt like a miracle, yet the underlying sense of dread never fully left Elon's mind. The temporal anomalies had started to stabilize, but they weren't gone. Not yet. The team had managed to calibrate the energy fields to a more harmonic state, aligning the fluctuations in space-time to reduce their intensity. But even with the adjustments, there was an undeniable tension in the air. The project was still volatile, and every test, every calculation, carried with it the risk of undoing everything they had worked so hard to stabilize. The question loomed, was this really enough? Or was this simply the calm before an even greater storm? Elon couldn't shake the nagging thought that they were missing something crucial. The pieces were starting to fit together in his mind, but there was a deep, unshakable feeling that the solution was still out of reach. One afternoon, as he sat in his office, going over the latest readings, he received an unexpected visitor. Sarah had come alone, her face drawn with worry. "Elon," she said, her voice tense, "I need to talk to you about Ava." Elon looked up, suddenly alert. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" "She's fine," Sarah replied, but her voice held an edge of unease. "It's just, she's been saying things again. Strange things. Things I don't fully understand, but you might." Elon stood up, walking toward Sarah. "What things?" Sarah hesitated, as if unsure how to put it into words. She said that the anomalies, the ripples in time, they're not just the result of the project. She said there's something else, something deeper, something waiting. Elon's pulse quickened. "Something waiting? What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath. She said there's a presence, a force that's been triggered by the project, but it's not a force we've caused. It's something that's always been there, underneath everything, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Elon felt a chill run down his spine. "And what does she think it wants?" "She said it's not about what it wants," Sarah said, her voice low. "It's about what it is. Something fundamental. Something beyond our comprehension." Elon was silent for a moment, processing Sarah's words. Ava's ability to see beyond the surface, to grasp the unseen forces at play, had always been uncanny. But this felt different. It was one thing to understand the fabric of space-time and the delicate balance they were working to maintain, but it was another thing entirely to suggest that there was an external force at play, something beyond the physical parameters they were familiar with. He knew that if Ava was sensing this, it could mean that their work had triggered something ancient, something that had been lying dormant, waiting for a moment to emerge. Later that night, Elon stood in the lab, staring at the data feed. The energy fields were still fluctuating, but the adjustments had made a significant difference. He watched as the readings stabilized for a brief moment, just long enough to give him a flicker of hope. But even as he celebrated the small victories, a new series of spikes began to appear on the monitor. At first, it was subtle, a minor deviation in the data. But within minutes, the fluctuations began to increase in intensity. The ripples were growing again. "Not again," Elon muttered under his breath. He immediately contacted Isaac. "Isaac, we need to shut it down now." But before Isaac could respond, another alarm went off. The distortion wasn't just in the temporal readings anymore. It was spreading through the lab systems. Lights flickered, and the air felt thick, almost electric. "Elon, what the hell is happening?" Isaac's voice came through the intercom, urgent. Elon's eyes widened as a strange phenomenon began to unfold on the screen. The energy fields they had worked so hard to stabilize were now behaving erratically, as if something was actively interfering with them. And then, for the briefest of moments, the room seemed to flicker, like the entire space was being drawn into another dimension. A split second of disorientation. Time seemed to skip. "Get everyone out of here now," Elon shouted. He ran toward the control panel, trying to isolate the system from the energy surge, but it was too late. A wave of energy surged through the lab, causing the walls to shake, the floor to tremble. The air was charged with static, and then darkness. Elon's eyes snapped open. He was lying on the floor of the lab, disoriented and breathless. The blaring alarms had stopped, and the lights were dim. The team had scattered, and there was no sign of them. But what caught his attention immediately was the absence of the usual hum, the sound of machines working, the pulse of energy in the room. Everything was eerily silent. He slowly got to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The data readouts on the screen had frozen, and the room seemed to have descended into a strange stillness. The very air felt different, as if it had thickened somehow. Then, Just as he was about to approach the control panel to restart the system, a voice echoed from behind him. Elon. He turned, his stomach dropping. Ava was standing in the doorway. Her presence was strange, almost dreamlike. She was calm, as if nothing had happened. She looked older somehow, her eyes filled with a depth of understanding that made his heart race. Ava? Elon asked, his voice shaking. How did you get here? What's going on? What just happened? Ava stepped forward slowly, her gaze fixed on him. You've opened a door, Elon. You've triggered the shift. What you've done has unraveled the boundaries. And now, it's coming. Elon felt a cold sweat form on his brow. What is it, Ava? What are you talking about? Ava's voice was soft, but her words carried a weight that seemed to reverberate through the space itself. It's not a what, Elon. It's a who. It's a presence that's always been here, waiting for the right moment. You've awakened it. Elon's mind raced, trying to process the implications of her words. You mean the Force? The one you've been sensing? Ava nodded. Yes, and it's no longer dormant. You've triggered it. The ripples are its wake. Elon felt a deep, sinking realization. We need to stop it. We need to shut it down before it destroys everything. Ava shook her head. It's too late for that now. The thread is already unraveled. There's no going back. But there's still a way to mend it, together. If we don't, everything will collapse. Elon stared at her, his mind racing. The lab was quiet. The world outside felt like it was holding its breath. They had opened something they couldn't close. But the only way forward was through it. I trust you, Ava, Elon said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me what to do. Ava's words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Elon stood frozen, the full weight of her revelation sinking in. The lab felt like it was suspended in time, the silence pressing in from all sides. He had always believed in science, in data, in facts. But here, standing before him, was a girl who spoke of something far greater than equations or technology. Something ancient, something unfathomable. What do you mean, mend it? Elon asked, his voice hoarse. If what you're saying is true, if we've triggered this presence, then what do we do now? How do we fix this? Ava's gaze remained steady, her eyes so intense that Elon felt as though she could see straight through him. She stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying an almost prophetic certainty. You can't fix it the way you've been trying. You've been focused on controlling it, on using force to stabilize it. But that's not the answer. You need to understand it. The threads, Elon, they're not just part of space-time. They're connected to everything, to the very fabric of existence. If you want to heal the rift, you have to approach it with a different mindset, a shift in perspective. Elon's mind raced. But I don't understand. The anomalies, the fluctuations, they're growing worse by the hour. The more we try to control it, the more volatile everything becomes. How do we undo something we can't even fully grasp? Ava's voice softened. You have to see it for what it is. The anomalies aren't an enemy. They're a consequence, a side effect. You've disturbed the balance. Now, you must rebalance it. Elon's brow furrowed as he processed her words. He had always thought of the anomalies as an external threat, something to be contained, controlled, and neutralized. But now, Ava was asking him to rethink everything, to view the disturbances as part of a larger system. A system that had been disturbed, yes, but not necessarily broken beyond repair. Rebalance, he repeated, as if the word itself might unlock the answer. He turned toward the control panel, his fingers hovering over the keys, but his mind was elsewhere, sifting through Ava's cryptic explanation. If we approach this as a system, a web, maybe I can realign the energy fields. But that doesn't explain the presence you've been sensing. If we've disturbed the balance of space-time, then what happens when the presence fully awakens? What does it want? Ava's eyes grew distant for a moment, as if she were looking far beyond the room, beyond time itself. It's not about what it wants, Elon. It's about what it is. It's not a force of nature. It's a force of will, a presence that exists within the threads themselves. It's not bound by the same laws you understand, and it's been waiting, hidden in the folds of space-time, for a moment like this to manifest. Elon swallowed hard. The more Ava spoke, the more surreal the situation became. He had always been a man of logic, of control. Yet here he was, standing on the precipice of something he couldn't quantify, something beyond his comprehension. Still, one thing was clear. If they didn't act quickly, they risked losing control of the very fabric of reality itself. How do we stop it from taking over? Elon asked, his voice shaking with the enormity of the question. Ava looked up at him, her gaze piercing. You can't stop it. You can only learn to coexist with it. But to do that, you'll need to stop fighting it. You'll need to find the point where you and the threads are aligned. Elon stared at her, a mixture of awe and disbelief running through him. He had always prided himself on being able to solve problems, to bend reality to his will through innovation and technology. But now, he was being asked to surrender control, to let go of his methods and embrace something far more intangible. He needed to know more. What do you mean by aligned? What does that even look like? Ava paused for a long time, her face thoughtful. It's about balance, Elon. The presence you've disturbed isn't something you can overpower. It's a part of the whole. The threads connect everything: the universe, time, matter, energy. The anomalies you're seeing, they're only reflections of the imbalance. You've opened a doorway, but you've forgotten that the doorway is part of the whole. You can't keep taking from it without understanding the larger system. But if you listen to it, if you understand its purpose, it will show you the way. Her words hung heavy in the air, a riddle without an answer. The more she spoke, the more Elon felt as though he was in the presence of a profound truth that was just out of his reach. How could he apply logic to something so beyond human comprehension? How could they hope to heal the fabric of space-time if they didn't even know the rules of the game? Ava, I'm not sure I can do this, Elon said, his voice tinged with frustration. I'm a scientist, a businessman. I deal with facts, with numbers. But this is beyond all of that. Ava smiled faintly, her eyes softening. I know, but you've already done more than you realize. You've opened the door, Elon. Now you have to walk through it. You've always been willing to push boundaries. Now, it's time to understand them. Elon's mind was in turmoil as he sat back at the control panel. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this felt different. It wasn't about building a rocket or creating an electric car. It was about the very fabric of the universe itself. As he stared at the readings, a new understanding began to form. The fluctuations weren't random. They were interconnected. They weren't anomalies to be corrected. They were symptoms of a deeper disturbance. And if Ava was right, the only way to fix it was to understand that disturbance, to realign the threads that connected everything. He tapped into the data once more, working with renewed purpose. The idea of harmonizing the energy fields, to align them with the threads, as Ava had said, suddenly didn't seem as impossible as it had before. He could see the pattern now, the delicate web of interconnections that bound everything together. He began making adjustments, but this time, he didn't focus on brute force solutions. Instead, he allowed the data to guide him, letting it speak to him in a language beyond equations. Slowly, the energy fields began to stabilize again. The chaos of the past few days subsided, but only slightly. Elon could sense that they were still on a razor's edge. They weren't out of danger yet, but the changes they had made had begun to make sense. They were aligning the forces, allowing them to flow in harmony rather than conflict. And as the fluctuations lessened, Elon felt a deep, quiet hope begin to stir inside him. As he sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, a sense of clarity washed over him. The process wasn't complete yet. There were still challenges ahead, still dangers to face. But for the first time since they had started this journey, Elon felt as though they were no longer fighting an invisible enemy. They were on the brink of understanding something far more profound than technology or physics. They were beginning to understand the nature of existence itself. And for the first time, Elon Musk wasn't alone in his quest to unravel the universe's greatest mystery. He had a guide, a child with a mind sharper than his own, who saw the world not through equations, but through the very threads that held it all together. The days following the lab's first brush with disaster were both calm and unsettling. Elon's mind never fully settled, the aftertaste of Ava's words lingering in the air like a riddle he couldn't quite solve. He had made progress with the energy field realignments, but every step felt like a temporary reprieve. The gravitational anomalies had stabilized, but the hum in the lab remained off-kilter. There was something lurking just beyond the edge of his understanding, something he could feel pressing against the edges of reality. Every morning, as he walked into the lab, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were balancing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything could unravel. But Ava, as always, seemed at ease. The child who had once seemed impossibly young for the wisdom she carried was now his steady anchor. Her presence had become more comforting than he cared to admit. While the rest of the team worked tirelessly, trying to keep up with the shifting tide of data, Ava sat quietly in the corner, her eyes closed as if meditating, always listening, always observing. It was as if she had tapped into something that Elon had yet to grasp, something beyond equations, beyond science. One evening, as Elon reviewed the latest simulations in the control room, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sarah. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with concern. Elon turned to face her, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking through some of the data." She stepped into the room, crossing her arms. "You've been on edge for days, Elon. I know you're worried about the project, but you've got to take a break. The team needs you to be sharp. We all need you to be sharp." Elon rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. He hadn't slept much in the past week, consumed by the need to keep the project on track. But Sarah was right. He had to step back, even if just for a moment. "I know," he said, his voice more fatigued than he intended. I don't know if we're really in control of this anymore. I keep thinking I'm missing something. The anomalies, the distortions, they're still happening, even with the adjustments. What if we've gone too far? What if we've triggered something we can't undo?" Sarah's expression softened. "Elon, you've built entire industries from the ground up. You've changed the world. This is just another problem to solve. You've faced worse before." Elon looked at her, meeting her gaze with a tired intensity. "You don't understand. This is different. This isn't a problem we can just fix with technology. It's something much bigger." Sarah didn't respond right away. She simply walked over to his desk and sat down, her eyes thoughtful. "I think you're right, but I also think you're letting fear take over. Fear of the unknown. And that's what's holding you back." Elon sighed. "Maybe, but this feels different. We're playing with forces we don't fully understand. Forces that, for all we know, could be beyond our control." A silence fell between them. Sarah glanced over at Ava, who was still seated in the corner of the room, her eyes closed in deep concentration. "What do you think she's doing?" Sarah asked, breaking the quiet. Elon turned to look at Ava. Her stillness was almost otherworldly. It was as if she wasn't just observing the lab, but connecting to something far more profound, something invisible to everyone else. "I don't know," Elon said softly, "but she's the only one who seems to understand it, the only one who doesn't seem afraid." Later that evening, Elon decided to take a walk outside the lab. The weight of everything was starting to crush him, and the sterile, claustrophobic walls of the lab were only amplifying his growing unease. The air outside felt cool and refreshing, a sharp contrast to the heat of his thoughts. He wandered aimlessly through the compound, his mind replaying every word Ava had said to him, every warning she had given. It wasn't just the anomalies or the strange fluctuations in space-time that bothered him. It was the presence she had spoken of, the force that was somehow tied to the very fabric of existence. What did she mean by it? Was it really a force of will, as she had suggested? Or was it something more malevolent? He stopped near the edge of the property, looking out at the horizon where the sky met the ground in a blur of fading twilight. His mind was awash with questions, doubts, and fears, but no answers. He felt more uncertain than ever. Back in the lab, Ava was still in her corner, her eyes now open, but her gaze far off in the distance. Elon could sense that she was deep in thought, connected to something invisible, something he couldn't touch. He approached her cautiously, almost afraid of disturbing whatever it was that kept her so still, so aware. "Ava," he called softly, his voice hesitant. She turned to face him, her expression calm. You're still unsure, aren't you? Elon nodded. I don't know what to believe anymore. You say we need to align the threads, but I don't understand how. I've been trying to solve this with science, by measuring it, by controlling it, but it's not working. The anomalies keep growing. The rift is widening, and I'm not sure I can stop it. Ava's gaze softened, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in her eyes. You're not supposed to stop it, Elon. You're supposed to understand it. The force that you've awakened, it's not an enemy. It's part of the system. It's a force of creation, of balance. But right now, you're fighting against it. You're treating it like something to be feared. Elon looked at her, his frustration growing. How can you say that? We don't know what this thing is capable of. We're on the edge of something we can't control. And you're telling me to stop fighting? Ava stood up slowly, her expression unwavering. Yes, because the more you fight, the more you distort everything. The anomalies, the rifts, they're a reflection of your resistance. You've disturbed the balance. Now, you have to learn to listen. Learn to coexist. Elon clenched his fists, his mind in turmoil. How can we coexist with something we don't understand? Something that could destroy everything? Ava walked toward him, her steps measured. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. It's not about destroying. It's about recreating. You've opened the door, but it's not too late to find the way forward. You just have to be willing to see things differently. Elon stood there for a moment, the weight of her words settling on him. Was it really as simple as Ava suggested? Could he shift his thinking enough to align with something so far beyond his understanding? Before he could respond, a sudden alarm blared from the control panel. The data on the screen had shifted. The fluctuations in the energy fields were intensifying once again, this time far more violently than before. The room filled with the sound of static, and the lights flickered ominously. Elon's heart raced. They were too late to prevent it. Get ready, Ava said, her voice calm. It's time. As the room seemed to tremble with the mounting energy, Elon realized the truth. This wasn't about stopping the force they had awakened. It was about finding a way to harness it, to ride the wave instead of drowning in it. The storm had arrived, and now they had to face it together. The lab hummed with an eerie intensity as the systems began to flicker. The fluctuating energy fields were no longer just data on a screen. They had become a living, breathing entity. The hum in the air felt like an electrical pulse running through the very walls, vibrating deep in Elon's bones. He had been so close to finding the answer, so certain he could solve the puzzle. But now, with the alarms blaring and the room shaking, all the progress he had made seemed like nothing more than an illusion. Ava was right. There was something much greater than him at play here, something far beyond the control of any human mind. As the lights flickered and the energy readings spiked, Elon looked toward Ava. She was standing still, unbothered by the chaos unfolding around them. Her face was focused, her expression as serene as ever. You feel it, don't you? Elon asked, his voice strained. It's getting worse. The threads are unraveling faster than we can keep up. Ava didn't reply immediately. She simply watched the fluctuating readings with a calmness that was almost unsettling. Then, after a beat, she nodded. It's not worse, Elon, she said quietly. It's awakening. Elon's stomach tightened at her words. Awakening? What do you mean? Ava's eyes met his, and there was something almost ancient in her gaze. This isn't just a force of nature, it's a force of will. The anomaly is alive in a way we don't understand. It's reacting to your actions, to everything we've done. Elon took a step back, his mind spinning. He had always been a man of reason, of facts, and yet everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, was suddenly being thrown into question. He had opened a doorway, yes, but had he unwittingly invited something in that was beyond their comprehension? Then what do we do now? Elon asked, his voice tight. How do we stop it? Ava didn't flinch at his words. She was calm, almost as if she had already accepted what was happening. You don't stop it, she replied, her voice soft. You learn to coexist. You find the point of equilibrium where you're no longer fighting it, but working with it. Elon swallowed hard. He had been trained to fight, to control. The very notion of surrendering to something as chaotic and unpredictable as this felt wrong. But Ava seemed to believe it was the only way forward. He looked back at the control panel. The energy fields were now fluctuating wildly, and the space around them seemed to distort, the walls warping ever so slightly as though the room itself were being pulled in different directions. His heart raced. "Listen to it, Elon," Ava said, her voice steady. "It's calling to you. You've disturbed the balance, yes, but now you must restore it. Don't resist it. Feel it. Allow yourself to understand what it is and how it can be part of you." Elon's mind raced. How could he possibly connect with something so incomprehensible? He had always believed in logic and reason, in the ability to break everything down into numbers and data. How could he just feel it? And yet, in the midst of all the chaos, something in him hesitated. A strange, subtle pull. The sensation was faint, almost imperceptible, like a whisper in the back of his mind. It wasn't fear. It was something else. It was an invitation. As the rift in space-time seemed to widen before him, Elon did something he never thought he would do. He closed his eyes. It wasn't a decision made out of confidence, but necessity. He couldn't keep fighting against something he couldn't understand. He had to let go. He had to listen. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the lab, the distant thrum of the energy fields. Then, as if responding to his willingness to surrender, something shifted. The air seemed to vibrate differently, more densely. The hum deepened, becoming a low, resonant pulse that thrummed in his chest. The room stopped shaking. The fluctuations on the screen slowed. Elon's breath caught. It was as though the world had shifted into a new phase, one where his mind could suddenly grasp a concept that had previously been beyond him. The threads. The very fabric of existence. It wasn't something to fight, but something to understand. He opened his eyes, and there, before him, was the vision of the anomaly. It wasn't a monster, as he had feared. It wasn't an enemy, as he had once believed. It was a wave, a force that moved with the rhythm of the universe. A pulse, a heartbeat. The energy fluctuations had turned into something more beautiful, like the waves of the ocean crashing against the shore, not in chaos, but in a pattern. He understood now. It wasn't just a disturbance. It was an invitation to learn, to reconnect. Ava's voice broke through the silence. "You're getting it. You're listening. It's time to act." Elon turned back to the control panel, where the energy field readings had now steadied. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and pressed a few keys. The data before him shifted, realigning. The tension in the air eased. The rift, the disturbance, wasn't gone, but it was no longer spiraling out of control. "Can you feel it?" Ava asked. Elon nodded slowly. "Yes, it's not gone, but we've balanced it for now, just like you said. The key isn't to stop it, but to allow it to be." Ava smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling as she nodded. "The threads are delicate, Elon. They're connected to everything. Every force, every thought, every moment. Once you understand that, you won't need to fight them anymore. You'll be able to work with them." Elon felt a weight lift off his chest, but it wasn't complete relief. There was still so much they didn't know, so much to understand. The anomaly was still there, pressing against the edges of their reality. But now, for the first time, he felt like he could face it, not as an enemy, but as a partner in a larger dance. He looked at Ava, his mind spinning. What happens next? Ava's gaze turned distant again, as if she were already seeing beyond this moment. "We've made the first step. Now, we need to go further. This is just the beginning." But just as Elon absorbed this new reality, the ground beneath him began to shake once more. The systems on the control panel flickered violently. The storm was far from over. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, as if the entire lab were being shaken by an unseen hand. The flashing lights intensified, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Alarms blared, and the energy readings spiked once more. But this time, Elon didn't panic. His hands moved with purpose, adjusting the controls, recalibrating the energy output. He had felt it before, the anomaly, the disturbance. But now, it was different. It wasn't just the environment reacting to their presence. It was as if the force had taken notice of them, as if it were now aware of their awareness. Ava stood motionless beside him, her expression unreadable. Her calmness was unsettling. The rest of the team was scrambling, trying to make sense of the fluctuating data, but none of them seemed to understand what was happening. To them, this was just another malfunction. To Elon, it was something far greater. He glanced over at Ava. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice sharp. This feels different." Ava's eyes met his, her gaze steady. She didn't flinch at the rising chaos around them. "It's beginning. The force you've awakened is responding to you. The more you resist it, the more it will push back. But you've made the first step, understanding. Now, you need to learn how to guide it." Elon's mind raced. He didn't have time for theories. He needed answers now. How do we guide it? How do we stop it from tearing everything apart? Ava's voice was soft, almost as if she were speaking from a distant place, as though she could see something Elon couldn't. "You don't stop it. You learn to move with it. You have to synchronize yourself with the anomaly. Only then will it become clear." Elon's hands hovered over the control panel, his mind racing. Synchronize with the anomaly? Was it even possible? How could he, a man of science, connect with something so intangible, so chaotic? The tremors in the room intensified, the very air vibrating with a strange energy. A new sound filled the room, a low, guttural hum that seemed to originate from nowhere. It was deep, like a pulse echoing through the universe itself. Elon swallowed hard. "What is that sound?" "It's the heartbeat of the anomaly," Ava answered quietly. "It's the sound of the force you've awakened, and it's calling to you." Elon shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. This can't be real." But the sound, the pulsing, rhythmic hum, didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the lab. The walls seemed to warp around him, the edges of reality blurring as if they were no longer bound by the rules of physics. Ava stepped closer to him, her voice a whisper in the chaos. "Feel it. Let it guide you." Elon closed his eyes, not out of trust, but necessity. There was too much noise, too much chaos. If he didn't focus, he would lose himself in the madness. At first, there was nothing, just silence and the hum in his ears. But then, it came, a faint whisper, barely perceptible, like a thread of thought woven into the fabric of his mind. It was like a voice, but not in words. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense of connection, of belonging. It was as though he were no longer separate from the anomaly, but part of it. His thoughts intertwined with the force, blending into a singular consciousness. The walls of the lab dissolved around him. The control panel, the monitors, the team, all of it faded into nothingness. In its place, there was a vast, infinite space, a swirling expanse of colors and shapes that defied comprehension. It was as if Elon had been transported into the heart of the anomaly itself, floating in a realm where the laws of physics no longer applied. The space around him seemed to shift, constantly changing, as though the very fabric of reality was being woven in real time. He felt small, insignificant, but at the same time, he felt everything. Every molecule, every particle, every force, every thought. They all existed in a perfect harmony, an intricate web of existence. And he was part of it. He reached out, tentatively at first, and touched the fabric of this reality. It was alive, warm, and fluid. It was not a static force to be controlled, but a dynamic, ever-changing entity that responded to his presence. Elon gasped as the understanding hit him. This wasn't a force to be controlled. It was a force to be understood. It had a will, a purpose, a place in the grand design of the universe. But as quickly as it came, the vision began to fade. The space around him fractured, breaking apart into chaotic fragments. The hum in his ears grew louder, more distorted, and the walls of the lab returned to their place, solidifying around him. He stumbled back, breathing heavily, his heart racing. Ava stood beside him, her expression unchanged. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked softly. Elon nodded, unable to speak at first. His mind was reeling. The vision, the understanding, it was overwhelming. It was as if he had glimpsed something beyond the veil of reality itself. I saw it, Elon whispered, his voice shaky. I felt it. But how? How do we bring that back? How do we control it? Ava looked at him with a mixture of understanding and sympathy. You don't control it. You guide it. You become part of it. Elon felt a wave of uncertainty crash over him. He had always believed that knowledge and control were the keys to understanding the universe. But now, everything he had learned seemed to fall apart. The answers he sought were no longer simple. There were no formulas, no equations, only a force far beyond human comprehension. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to be ready, Ava replied, her tone calm. You just have to trust. Trust that the anomaly is not your enemy. It's not something to fear. It's part of the universe, part of the fabric of existence. You are simply discovering it. Before Elon could respond, the lab shook again, this time, with a violence that sent him crashing to the floor. The monitors flickered wildly, and the energy readings spiked, off the charts. Something was happening, something beyond their ability to control. A voice crackled over the intercom, desperate and frantic. Elon, Ava, the system's failing. We can't stop it. The fields are destabilizing. Elon's heart skipped a beat. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ava turned to him, her eyes full of calm certainty. It's happening. This is the point of no return. Elon nodded, taking a deep breath. He didn't know if he was ready, but he couldn't turn back now. They were headed straight into the heart of the storm. The lab was a cacophony of noise, alarms blaring, monitors flashing red, and the whine of the energy systems desperately struggling to maintain their equilibrium. The air itself seemed to pulse with energy, vibrating in a way that felt almost alive. Elon's heart hammered in his chest as he fought to stay focused, his mind racing through 1,000 calculations, trying to find a way to stabilize the anomaly. But the more he tried to control it, the more the system rebelled. The walls shook again, and the hum, deep, primal, almost animalistic, grew louder, more insistent. He could feel the anomaly's presence like a heavy weight pressing down on him, an unseen force that was pushing against everything he knew. It wasn't just a force of nature. It was alive, and it was aware of him. Ava stood by his side, her expression as serene as ever, her eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding around them. Elon wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he knew that in this moment, Ava was his only lifeline. She was the one person who seemed to understand what was really happening. Ava, he said, his voice tight with frustration, we're losing control. This thing, it's too powerful. How can we stabilize it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the readings with an intensity that almost seemed meditative. Then, finally, she turned to him, her eyes piercing. You're still thinking like an engineer, she said softly. You're trying to control the chaos. But that's not how this works. Elon shook his head. I have to control it. If I don't, it will destroy everything. We'll lose everything. Ava took a slow, steady breath. You don't control it, Elon. You learn to coexist with it. You align yourself with it. That's the only way forward. The words hit him like a cold splash of water. Coexist? Align? It sounded like a concept from a different world, one he couldn't even begin to understand. But there was something in her voice, a quiet certainty, that made him pause. In that moment, the air in the room shifted. A strange stillness fell over them, like a pause in the storm. The energy fields, which had been flickering erratically, began to stabilize. The blaring alarms softened, and the monitor's readings leveled off. Elon's eyes widened. What's happening? Ava nodded, her gaze never leaving the flickering energy readings. It's reacting to you, Elon. You've started to align yourself with it. The more you let go of the need to control, the more it will stabilize. It was an absurd thought. Let go? How could he possibly let go of control when the entire fabric of reality was at risk? But the calmness in Ava's voice, combined with the strange quiet in the room, made him reconsider. He had already seen the anomaly respond to him once before, in that otherworldly vision. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to this idea of coexistence. The storm outside the lab was growing, and with it, the pressure inside. He could feel the walls pressing in, as though the very space around them was folding under the immense weight of the energy fields. He closed his eyes again, just as he had before. This time, instead of focusing on the controls, he let his thoughts drift. He stopped thinking in terms of numbers, equations, and logic. He allowed himself to feel, to experience the anomaly without trying to fight it. And there it was again, the soft pulse, like the heartbeat of the universe. At first faint, but growing stronger, resonating through his body. It was the same sensation he had felt before, when he had closed his eyes and allowed himself to connect. The hum was no longer just a noise. It was a language, a rhythm, something he could feel. In that moment, he understood. The anomaly wasn't just some rogue force that had to be contained. It was part of the universe. It was the universe, woven into the fabric of existence, both chaotic and orderly, both destructive and creative. It was alive, not in the way a person is alive, but in a deeper, more fundamental sense. Elon breathed deeply, allowing himself to embrace the flow, to become part of it. The tension in the room, the rattling walls, the erratic energy fields, it all began to settle, slowly. The storm outside, which had been building to a catastrophic peak, suddenly began to dissipate. The air felt lighter, less suffocating. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, he saw the anomaly clearly, not as a threat, but as a living presence that had simply been waiting for him to recognize it. Ava's voice broke the silence. "You've done it." Elon turned to her, his eyes wide. "I don't understand. It's calming down. How is that possible?" Ava smiled softly, her gaze still fixed on the energy readings. "You've synchronized with it. The force you were trying to control wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to be understood. You didn't need to fight it, Elon. You just needed to listen." Elon stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his whole life trying to impose order on the world, to bend it to his will. But in this moment, he realized the truth. The universe didn't work that way. Control was an illusion. The only way to survive in this world was to find harmony with it. The calmness didn't last long. Just as the system seemed to stabilize, there was a sudden, jarring shift. A pulse shot through the air, sending a shockwave of energy through the room. The ground shook violently, and Elon was thrown off his feet, crashing to the floor. Ava was already moving, her body a blur as she worked to stabilize the systems. "It's not over yet," she said, urgency creeping into her voice. "This was just the first phase. The anomaly isn't going to just let us waltz in and take control." Elon scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. "What's happening? What do we do now?" Ava's hands flew over the controls, her expression intense. "The anomaly has sensed your presence, Elon. It knows you can feel it now, but it's still testing you. It's still trying to understand you. You have to hold steady. Don't lose your focus." He nodded, though the uncertainty crept back in. There was no turning back now. He had crossed a threshold. There was no way to go back to the world of equations and control. They were in the deep end now, and the real test was just beginning. The lab continued to shake, the monitors flashing in chaotic patterns. The anomaly was pushing back. But this time, Elon was ready. This time, he wasn't fighting it. This time, he was learning to move with it. The room trembled again, the energy pulses now more erratic and forceful, as if the very air were alive and trying to push against them. Elon could feel the pressure building again, heavier than before. Every inch of the lab vibrated with intensity, each flicker of the monitor's lights reflecting the increasing chaos. But now, he wasn't afraid. Not like he was before. He had learned, however reluctantly, that fear was a product of resistance. Resisting the unknown, resisting what he couldn't control. But he was past that. He had made the choice to surrender to the force, to listen. Beside him, Ava worked swiftly, her fingers dancing over the controls, her movements precise and measured, as if she had been doing this for eons rather than moments. She didn't flinch, didn't break focus. If she was feeling the weight of the storm, it didn't show. The pulse of energy thrummed louder, becoming almost unbearable. It surged through the walls, through the floor. Elon could hear it in his bones. It wasn't just in the lab anymore. It felt as if the entire world was humming to its rhythm. The hum was a living thing, growing louder, deeper, more insistent, like the heartbeat of a creature too vast for him to understand. He closed his eyes and took a steadying breath. He didn't need to fight it. He didn't need to overpower it. He just needed to be with it. Like Ava had said, let it move through him. Let it teach him. The moment he let go, the storm in his mind quieted. It wasn't that the energy around them diminished, but rather that his sense of self dissolved into the flow. He felt no more urgency, no more panic. It was as though he had become part of the anomaly. The boundary between him and it blurred. He was no longer just Elon Musk, the scientist, the creator, the innovator. He was just a single point in a vast, infinite web of connection, vibrating with the energy of the universe itself. In that moment, everything made sense. The anomaly wasn't wrong or chaotic. It was simply another force in the universe, part of the delicate balance that held everything together. It was not something that could be controlled or fixed. It was something that had always existed and always would. It was part of the very fabric of existence. Ava's voice broke through his focus, soft but steady. You understand now, don't you? Elon opened his eyes. He nodded slowly. I do. It's not about control. It's about understanding. It's always been about understanding. Ava smiled, her eyes warm but serious. Exactly. The anomaly is a part of the greater whole. It's a force, yes, but it is also a teacher. And you, Elon, have been chosen to understand it, to help it reveal its truths. You didn't just find a breakthrough in science today. You found the key to a greater understanding of existence itself. Elon swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what was happening to him, what exactly this meant, but he knew one thing. The world would never be the same. Not for him, not for humanity. Suddenly, the storm around them shifted. The energy surge peaked, and then everything stopped. Elon froze. There was a moment of complete silence. The alarms had stopped blaring. The monitors, which had been flickering and flashing, now displayed stable readings. The air, once thick with tension, was now still. The hum, that deep, constant vibration, had faded to a soft pulse. Ava's fingers flew across the controls, checking the systems one last time. We've done it. The energy has stabilized. Elon could hardly believe it. For a moment, it felt like everything had slipped into a surreal calm. The storm had passed, and they were still standing. Is it over? Elon asked, his voice sounding foreign in the silence. Ava turned to him, her expression unreadable. For now, Elon felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had tamed the chaos. Or rather, they had learned to live with it. He had learned to live with it. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the same kind of tension he had felt earlier. This time, it was the kind of tension that comes after a battle has been fought and won, even if the victor's identity is still in question. Elon looked down at his hands, his mind still processing everything. This anomaly, the force, had been something beyond human comprehension. It had been a threat, a danger, something to be feared. And now, for the first time, he understood. It wasn't a threat. It was part of the universal balance. And he, along with Ava, had unlocked the path to understanding it. But there was more to come. There was always more. Ava's gaze softened, almost as if she could read his thoughts. You're wondering what comes next. Elon blinked, startled. How could she know? He hadn't said anything aloud. You've crossed a threshold, Elon, she continued, her voice calm but filled with an underlying current of excitement. You've touched the heart of something ancient, but you've only glimpsed the surface. The anomaly is not the only force out there. This, what you've experienced, is a fraction of a much larger picture. Elon furrowed his brow. What do you mean? What's out there? Ava's eyes flickered with something deeper, something almost dangerous. There are other forces, other anomalies, things that the world hasn't even begun to understand. But you've just unlocked a way of seeing them, feeling them. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Elon's pulse quickened. He felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. It was as if the entire room had grown smaller, the stakes higher. Ava was right. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Are we ready for that? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava met his gaze steadily, her eyes intense. I don't know if anyone can be ready for what comes next. But you are no longer the same man who walked into this lab a few hours ago. And neither am I. Elon's mind raced. He wasn't sure he understood everything that had happened, or what it all meant. But one thing was clear. They had just uncovered something that could change everything. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. He looked back at the monitors, where the energy readings were stable for the moment. But he knew, deep down, that stability was an illusion. This was only the beginning. There was more to learn, more to uncover, and more to understand. And he, Elon Musk, was about to plunge deeper into the unknown than ever before. Ava stood up, her hands resting on the edge of the control panel. The world isn't ready for what we've discovered, but it will be soon. And when that day comes, we will be the ones to guide them. Elon's heart raced. He was ready, or at least he thought he was. But with each passing moment, the weight of the truth settled more heavily on his shoulders. The world as he knew it had just shifted. The rules had changed. And in that shift, there was no turning back. The room was silent, save for the occasional hum of the energy system, now quieted to a steady pulse. Outside the lab, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world in a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Elon stood in the center of the room, staring at the now stabilized anomaly, his mind racing to process everything that had just occurred. Ava, as always, was calm. Too calm, but her eyes betrayed a deep intensity, one that suggested she knew something more. Something Elon wasn't yet ready to face. So, what now? Elon asked, breaking the silence. The words felt hollow, like they had no weight behind them. There was too much at stake, too much they had discovered to simply move on. But at the same time, he didn't know where to go from here. Ava stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. Now, we figure out what we've truly unlocked. Elon frowned. What do you mean? The anomaly is stabilized, for now. We've made contact, understood it. I thought that was the goal. That was part of it, Ava replied, her tone firm. But you've only touched the surface. What we've discovered here, what you've experienced, is bigger than either of us can comprehend. This is just the first chapter. And trust me, Elon, the deeper you go, the more you'll realize there's a whole universe of questions we've barely scratched. Forces beyond your imagination. Elon leaned back against one of the lab tables, staring at the anomaly as it pulsed rhythmically, its energy ebbing and flowing. His mind couldn't help but race back to the images he'd seen. The visions of other realms, other timelines, possibilities that stretched out into infinity. He had felt a deep connection to it, to everything. What do you mean by forces beyond imagination? Elon asked, his voice steady but his heart pounding in his chest. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. Ava met his gaze. You saw the patterns, didn't you? The glimpses. The connections between the anomaly and everything. What you've touched isn't just an anomaly in the traditional sense. It's a signal, a message. It's as if this force, this energy, is trying to communicate something with us. Something ancient, something alive. The word alive echoed in Elon's mind. Could it really be? Was this anomaly something more than an energy source? Something more than just a scientific phenomenon to be analyzed and quantified? Was it conscious? Suddenly, Elon felt the weight of his discovery like a crushing weight on his chest. If Ava was right, and he didn't doubt her, then they weren't just studying a strange force in the universe. They were staring down the very fabric of existence itself. What are we supposed to do with that knowledge? Elon muttered, half to himself. If it's alive, if it's a message, then what is it trying to tell us? What are we supposed to learn from this? Ava shook her head. I don't know yet, but we're not alone in this. There are others, Elon. People who've been searching for this, just like us. People who have known for centuries that this force, this anomaly, is a key to something greater. something that could change everything. And I fear that when we start digging deeper, we'll uncover truths we aren't prepared to face. Elon's breath caught in his throat. Others? He hadn't considered that there might be factions, groups of people who were already in the know. He hadn't even thought about what the consequences of his discovery could be, what kind of power it could unlock. His gaze wandered to the monitors, still flashing with activity. Data was flowing in steadily, streams of information too complex to process at once. His mind instinctively wanted to dive into the raw data, to study it, to break it down into manageable chunks. But now, after everything that had happened, he knew it wasn't enough. The data was only part of the puzzle. It was the meaning, the context, he needed to understand. Before he could speak again, the door to the lab opened. The sound of footsteps echoed softly, but the figure entering was unmistakable. Richard, the head of Tesla's R&D department, walked in with an expression of curiosity mixed with concern. "Elon, Ava," Richard said, nodding to both of them as he stepped inside. "I'm getting some strange readings from the outer perimeter. The energy signals are spiking again, but this time, they're different. It's almost as if they're responding to something." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Ava, whose expression had shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. The faintest flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. "What do you mean, responding?" Elon asked, moving toward Richard. "I'm not sure," Richard said, his voice low. "But whatever it is, it's happening now. And it's intelligent. The pattern is shifting, almost like it's mimicking our movements, our actions." Ava stepped forward, her face tense. "Is it evolving?" Richard glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "That's the only way to describe it. The signals are growing more complex, almost like they're learning." Elon's mind raced. The anomaly had already proven to be far more than what they had originally believed. But now it seemed to be alive, adaptive, and intelligent, and it was responding to their presence, to their actions. He turned to Ava. "What do we do now?" She met his gaze, the weight of the situation sinking in. "We need to communicate with it. But we have to be careful. If it's evolving, learning from us, we can't treat it like just another scientific experiment. We need to approach it with respect." Elon took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The anomaly was not just a discovery. It was something far greater. And whatever it was, it had started watching them. Ava turned back to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. Elon watched her work, his mind still processing the implications of what was happening. The energy signals were indeed shifting, becoming more intricate, more precise. Almost like the anomaly was learning from the data they had gathered, adapting to the inputs it was receiving. "Do you think it understands us?" Elon asked quietly, as though the very question might break the fragile thread of connection they had with the anomaly. Ava's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "I think it's trying to understand us." The realization hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. This anomaly, this force they had barely begun to comprehend, wasn't just interacting with them, it was learning about them. And in return, it was showing them things they couldn't yet understand. What if it's not just us it's trying to communicate with? Elon said, the thought taking root in his mind. What if it's been watching, learning, waiting for someone to find it? Ava didn't answer at first. She just continued to type furiously, her expression one of deep concentration. But when she finally spoke, her words were heavy. "Then we're not the only ones who've been searching." The storm outside had passed, but a new kind of storm had begun. The anomaly wasn't just a force of nature anymore. It was an intelligence. And with that intelligence came a terrible power. The ability to shape not just the future, but the very fabric of reality itself. And just like that, the game had changed. The days that followed felt like a blur. Rush of data, experiments, and discussions that took place under the ever-watchful eye of the anomaly. Elon had always thrived in high-stakes environments, but this was different. The air in the lab felt heavier now, as if the room itself were charged with an energy that couldn't be seen but could certainly be felt. Ava, once a calm presence at his side, was now pacing the lab, her mind working furiously on the problem. She had become more distant in the last few days, less human, almost, as though the weight of the knowledge they'd uncovered was slowly swallowing her whole. Elon tried to push aside the nagging feeling that this was no longer just about science or discovery. It was about something far more dangerous, something that was awakening, and it was becoming more aware of them with every passing second. The anomaly, once erratic and unpredictable, had evolved into something far more sophisticated. The energy signatures they had been tracking no longer followed any known pattern. They were too perfect, too deliberate, as if the anomaly was purposefully crafting a message for them. "What are we looking at, Ava?" Elon asked, his voice strained as he studied the new data on the screens in front of him. The patterns now displayed were unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was as though the anomaly had begun to send out signals, not just reactive energy bursts, but coherent bursts of information, almost like a form of communication. Ava stood by the console, her face lit by the soft glow of the screen, her fingers flying over the keys. It's not just reacting to us anymore, Elon," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's talking to us." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. Talking? In what way? Ava's fingers froze mid-typing as she glanced at him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a flicker of fear. "I think it's showing us something. Something far beyond anything we can understand. But whatever it is, it's not human. And it's not from Earth." Elon's heart skipped a beat. The enormity of what she was suggesting hit him hard. They had known from the beginning that the anomaly was unlike anything they had ever encountered, but the idea that it could be alien, that it could be from outside of Earth, seemed unfathomable. "Are you saying this thing, whatever it is from another world?" Elon's voice was tight, each word seeming to hang in the air longer than it should have. Ava took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the console as if bracing herself for what she was about to say. "I don't know for sure, but the energy signatures we're seeing are inconsistent with any known physical laws. They don't match anything on Earth. It's not like anything we've encountered in the scientific community. But the patterns, they're deliberate, purposeful, almost like someone, or something, is trying to reach us." Elon turned away from the screen and looked out the large windows of the lab. Beyond, the city stretched out, unaware of the monumental discoveries unfolding just beneath their feet. The enormity of what they were dealing with struck him all at once, as though the weight of the universe had finally settled on his shoulders. "What if this is the beginning of something bigger?" Elon said softly, more to himself than to Ava. "What if this force, this intelligence, is part of a larger network? Something that's been out there for longer than we could possibly imagine?" Ava didn't answer immediately, her eyes lost in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice tinged with an unsettling clarity. "If it is part of something bigger, then we're in the middle of something that could reshape everything we know about life, the universe, and reality itself. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're the ones who've discovered it." Elon felt his pulse quicken. He knew, deep down, that the stakes were higher than ever before. They had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. The force, whatever it was aware of them. It was watching them, communicating with them, and the implications of that were vast. "We need to understand what it wants," Elon said, his voice firm with resolve. "We need to figure out why it's communicating with us and what it's trying to show us. We can't afford to ignore it any longer." Ava nodded, her expression somber. "I agree, but we have to be careful. This thing, whatever it is not something we can control. We've already seen that. If it's reaching out to us, we don't know what its endgame is. We can't just assume it's friendly." Elon nodded in agreement, but inside, a deep excitement had begun to stir. The mysteries they were uncovering weren't just scientific. They were existential. They were touching the very core of what it meant to be alive, to be human, to exist in a universe that could be far more complex than they had ever imagined. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. The weight of the discovery pressed on his chest, keeping him awake as his mind raced through endless possibilities. He wandered through the dark hallways of the lab, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. The screens, now dimmed to conserve energy, cast faint glows along the walls, like ghosts of data still dancing in the dark. He stopped at the observation window, looking out over the city. The lights flickered, the streets silent except for the occasional car. But in that moment, everything felt wrong. It was as though the world around him was too still, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. His thoughts kept returning to Ava's words. This isn't from Earth. It's not human. What did that mean? What kind of intelligence was out there, beyond their comprehension? If the anomaly was an intelligence, a message, something capable of understanding them, then what else could be out there in the vastness of space? What if this was only the beginning? He turned back to the console, his mind made up. They couldn't wait. They had to dig deeper, understand this force, communicate with it. But how? How could they make sense of something so alien, so outside their understanding? A new message flashed across the monitor in front of him, one he hadn't seen before. The pattern was different, more intricate, more detailed. It was almost as if the anomaly was speaking directly to him, giving him a glimpse into something deeper. His heart raced as he studied the patterns, his mind trying to decode the symbols, the frequencies. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The message wasn't just a random set of pulses, it was a map that led beyond the stars. Ava entered the lab, her footsteps light but purposeful. She had been looking for him, and it seemed like she had found him at the perfect moment. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the map on the screen, the data pulses flashing across the monitors. "Elon," she said, her voice tense but excited. "What is this? What did you find?" Elon didn't take his eyes off the screen. "A map. A message. The anomaly. It's showing us something. Something out there." Ava leaned in, her breath caught in her throat as she studied the symbols. The intricate design had a symmetry to it that seemed almost impossible to replicate with human technology. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. It's not just a signal. It's a blueprint. "A path," she said softly. "This is a map to something, a place. But where?" Elon turned to her, his eyes blazing with intensity. "It's not just a place, Ava. It's a call. A call to us. A call to humanity." For the first time, Elon felt a sense of certainty, a sense of purpose. They weren't just exploring an anomaly anymore. They were standing at the edge of something bigger, something ancient, something far beyond human understanding, waiting to be discovered. And he was ready to find it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?